Welcome back to another episode of the Shots from the Winchester podcast. It's a little bit of a somber episode today, but it's well worth it. This week is 20 years since Operation Anaconda occurred in Afghanistan in 2002. What some of you may know as Roberts Ridge. There's been a lot of books written about it. There's a lot of videos on YouTube and a lot of podcasts done about it. We're pretty honored to have Alan Mack, who is one of the Army Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the 160th. He was a pilot on one of the helicopters that was involved in the battle. Actually crashed twice over the course of a couple days, and yet kept going back in. He's got a wild story about what was going on, some stuff that, if you read any of the books, he reveals stuff in this podcast that I never knew. Little details that really bring home how incredible this entire battle was, and it's a great tribute to those who didn't come home from the battle, as well as those who did, and those who left it all in the mountain. Stick around. It's a really 20 years later. It's a great honor for us to pay tribute to those warriors who took it to the enemy up on the mountain. Stick around.
This individuality stuff is a bunch of crap.
There's a reason why.
A master of innovation.
The key to this growing is you.
Any rational person would give up.
I can't disagree with that.
Make sure that we're not prisoners of our own experiences.
You need a team of great people.
Will not tolerate a loser.
What they need is a common vision.
Helping organizations win one veteran at a time. This is the Green Castle.
All right. Hey, Alan, thanks so much. Do you go by Mac or do you go by Alan?
Alan.
All right,
Or,
Alan.
well, anybody that knew me in the military, it was Al.
Al. All right. Fair enough. Well, Al, thanks for joining us. It came to our attention that the 20th anniversary of Roberts Ridge, or of Operation Anaconda, was coming up, which is crazy to believe it's been 20 years. But we just, and there's been so much has transpired in the news lately with Chapman getting the footage and the footage being released, and Chapman being nominated and ultimately being awarded the Medal of Honor, and just all the other heroes that kind of came and maybe the unsung heroes from that event. You had such an integral part in that. I guess before we get into that, and it's obviously that's the part I'd love to talk about, but tell us a little about how you ended up in the service, how you ended up flying, how you ended up on Chinooks, and where you are now.
Wow. Okay. Well, I had almost a 36-year career, so that's a long story in itself, but I'll try to water it down a little bit. So I grew up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's a coastal area. New Hampshire's got like a whole 16 miles of coastline between Massachusetts and Maine. But that's where I grew up, and we had a Navy base there, and I knew I didn't want to be in the Navy. And we had an Air Force base there. I knew I didn't want to be in the Air Force. And so the Army looked like a pretty cool thing. And you got to remember, when I was growing up, the Vietnam War was going on, and there was nightly news, 6 o'clock news or whatever. And you always saw Huey helicopters coming in, and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to fly helicopters. So I was going to go to college out of high school, and I kind of decided I wasn't really mature enough, and I knew I would not study. I'd just party. So I went to the recruiter and said, I want to fly helicopters. And the guy said, well, flying helicopters right off the street is possible, but, really not a good idea. Why don't you join up, as an aircraft mechanic? You get, Army aviation under your belt, and then go to flight school. So, he didn't get credit for pilots, but he did get credit for mechanics. And it actually was good advice. And I did that. I went to Fort Eustis, Virginia, and Korea was my first assignment, then El Paso, and then Germany, when it was still West Germany. Then I went to flight school in 1989. And
at this point, you've been in how many years?
So that's about 9-10 years or so.
Wow, so you did 9-10 years enlisted.
Yeah.
And then finally, which is crazy, that your initial conversation with the recruiter started with, I want to fly helicopters. And even before that, like you said, early in high school. So you go through high school years, then you go through 9-10 years in the service, and that dream is still very much there.
Oh yeah, and I'd fly them now if I could, if I had some money, if I had one, But so I went to flight school, and I was lucky enough to be at the top of my class. And the reason that was lucky is that two Chinook slots opened up there at Fort Rucker. And back in those days, the only people flying Chinooks were CW4s and above, as like CW4s, captains majors, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
the warrants were all guys that had been to Vietnam, and they, kind of, it was a reward for a good time in service. So at W1, didn't get to fly Chinooks, but unfortunately for the Army and its infinite plans, everybody retired at the same time. Think about the airlines nowadays, right?
Right.
So they're like, all right, well, we need some W1s. And the only metric they had back then really was, class standing. So off I went, to the Chinooks, and I was pissed, which is funny because I wanted to be an assault pilot, which is what I thought of
Yeah.
Hueys. It's like,
Yeah.
you come
That
in,
iconic image of Vietnam, the iconic image of coming in,
yeah,
not the big lumbering school bus, right?
right. But that's what I wanted to do, was assault. And, I didn't have a choice. They're like, oh, you're coming to do this. And then, it's funny because a couple of years later that, we did what we call heavy assault, right? But,
Yeah.
so I get to my unit in Savannah, Georgia, just as Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And that was good for me as far as aviation perspective, because the commander said no one's coming over, not fully certified. You have different readiness progressions, and they spent. Heck, I flew 2, 3 times a day with different instructors as they tried to get me up
Wow.
to speed. And sure enough, they did. And we flew our aircraft up to Wilmington, North Carolina, to put them on a slow boat to Saudi Arabia, and off it went, and we got over there, built them up, started flying a thing called Desert Express, which was hauling parts out, like kind of like emergency stuff, tank transmissions and
Yeah. Yeah.
engines and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun. And of course, because I was a W1 and nobody wanted to fly in the desert at night, in a CH-47D, under goggles, right? That was
Yeah. Yeah.
insane. They thought. And I was like, yeah, whatever, So they stuck the junior IP instructor pilot with me, and off we went. And I got all kinds of experience that I wouldn't have got otherwise.
This is during Desert Shield, Desert Storm time frame.
Yeah, yeah. So we
Oh,
did about 7 months over there,
wow.
and of course, the war kicks off, and it doesn't last too long. About 100 hours, I think.
Yeah.
And we packed up and came home. And that was my exposure to combat. It was very stressful at the time. As a young guy, never been in combat. Peacetime army. I mean, the Cold War, but it's
Yeah.
nothing like this. We had a couple of Scud missiles come in at us, and the Patriots intercepted them. And that in itself, if you think of the odds, really isn't that big of a deal. But it's kind of scary when you're on the other end of it. And a barracks just down the road from us actually got hit. I think like 20 or 30 people died in their sleep
By a
when a
Scud.
Scud. Yeah,
Wow. No
yeah,
way.
yeah. And then we moved out to the desert right after that, and did our thing. But what was funny is I was in Savannah, and right next to us was a 160th unit, 3rd Battalion, 160th, and a lot of our guys would try to join them.
So,
And there were
so for
guys.
those, so for folks listening who don't know, the 160 is the Special Operations Aviation Regiment, right? The SOAR, right?
Right.
The
Yep.
Special
Special
Operations Wing.
Operations
So,
Aviation
if you're a
Regiment.
pilot, that's the next level, right? That's what you're aspiring to, right?
Yeah, if you want to be an assault guy, right? I mean, a lot of Chinook guys have a really good life. I mean, they
Yeah.
they do. And if that's what you want, which I did at first, but then I was watching the 160th, but I saw these guys go over and they get turned down. And I would think, God, they're better than me. Why? I'm not going to try out. It's just going to be hell, and they're not going to take me. And, what I learned later on, especially doing assessments as an instructor, was, there's a lot of factors that go into that, whether it's, and it really isn't how good the guy can fly. It's usually, either his credit report or his family situation or his demeanor. He can't get along with people, who knows. But so later on, after a tour in Korea, flying Chinooks, I came back, taught at Fort Rucker for a little while, and that was boring.
Yeah,
and
I
I
can
had
only
some,
imagine, right? Korea, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and then you're back there teaching the
yeah,
new guys.
and
Yeah,
generally, that's also senior people, and I just was kind of moving along quickly for my rank, and I probably was there a couple of years earlier than I should have been as far as from my own mentality. But I met some guys from the 160th coming through, and actually a couple of them were in the instructor pilot course with me, and they handed me an application, said, "Al, when you get tired of this, fill that out and send it up. We'll give you a good word." So time went by. I got a couple of sets of students that really drove me nuts. There were some guys that just didn't want to be there, kind of thing. And I was like, I want to be with people who want to be here, and want to do what we're doing. So I just slowly filled out that paperwork in pen. It wasn't nowadays do it on the computer, but I had it in my desk drawer and I'd pull it out, fill out a couple blocks, and then one day it was full. So I sent it off, and turns out they needed Chinook pilots pretty badly because
this
they
is for the
took me.
160th,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and this is still pre 9/11, then, right?
yeah. This
Okay,
is 1994, 95 time frame.
okay, kind of a lull in combat activity, then, right? I mean, there was like the Bosnia stuff going on, but it was really kind of a lull at that point, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah. The Bosnia stuff, Mogadishu, obviously,
Oh, great.
happened there, and yeah. So
Yeah.
I got there. It was interesting because when I got to the 160th, a lot of the older guys, not the Chinook guys, but the Little Bird guys and the Black Hawk guys were all veterans of Somalia,
Yeah.
and a lot of the business that the regiment did. You know, the regiment's very steeped in its tradition in that it was formed after Eagle Claw failed,
Right.
the Iranian hostage rescue, and they were still doing business the same way as if we had the same equipment, and so the one thing about that organization is it does, it takes a while to adjust and morph, with
Yeah.
the new.
Like turning around an aircraft carrier, right? It's very slow,
Yeah.
very methodical, and it's
Yeah.
government, right? So it's
Right.
it's infused with bureaucracy and red tape. And just as some context, now you're right. So you bring up an interesting point that the organization had been founded in the wake of tragedy, right? So the failed the C-130 and the Pavlos, I think we're going, or the
Well, they were
53s, right?
CH-53s, minesweepers actually. So
Right.
they
So
were, yeah,
I was gonna say, so they went down. Then we lost two birds in Mogadishu. So still on the heels of that, it's interesting. You're coming at a time when they've really suffered quite a few tragic instances of in terms of just tactics and how to be savvy in the air as a next caliber or a higher caliber pilot, right?
right. And they, the cool thing is they do learn from that and they
Yeah,
morph.
yeah,
But the general, like navigation, we would go with, you start in green platoon as the training platoon, and you fly around, clock and compass, and that's it. They don't really, they didn't have GPS was just kind of fairly new, not like it is today. And they were using Trimble, not the Trimbles, what was it? Omega Navigation Systems and Loran, right? So these are fixed antennas around the globe that send out signals, usually to ships and some airplanes and such. And the GPS was just kind of coming on in the mid '90s,
yeah.
you know.
So only moderately useful, but still, you're flying as you said, clock and compass, a bearing and a speed and a time on how far, and that's where I should make my left turn, right?
Right, right. And then if you can see out the windows nicely, obviously you can see terrain features or
Sure.
roads or whatever, and make your turns, and of course the training process for the 160th, they love watching you fail, right? I mean, it's a bit of a hazing, which a lot of life as a warrant officer is hazing anyway. Junior warrants are always, it's terrible to say, "Man, we got hazed," but no, that's what it was. It was outright hazing, but it built character, and it did help in, there's that certain swagger and ego that a warrant officer has, and it comes from that hazing, like emerging on the other side.
Yeah, right. So the constant trial by fire. So you end up going to the 160th in the mid 90s, and then so kind of walk us up through like up to the 9/11, and then very quickly into 2002.
Yeah. So so I talked about the traditional way of doing business, right?
Yeah.
And you got to break that mold. So we had a commander come in, really was a platoon leader at first, and we went to Kuwait in it was either the end of '98 or early '99. It was a operation called Desert Thunder, and it was when Saddam Hussein kicked all the nuclear inspectors out. So we were supposed to go in and you know take him out essentially. So it was a special operations uh, thing, not a big conventional thing. But as soon as we started to stage in Kuwait, he relented, gave in, and that was that. But instead of letting us go home, CENTCOM decided to keep us in theater for another 6 months, just in case. So what do you do when you're in the Middle East with nothing to do? They put us in charge of personnel recovery for Operation Southern Watch, right? So
Yeah.
that was the operation enforcing the no-fly there in Iraq, and we got to fly every night. I mean, not quite 7 days a week, but 5, maybe 6 days a week. And we had the 20th SOS with us. That was the Air Force Special Operations Unit at the time. We had 8th SOS, which was the air refueling tankers. We had the SAS and 5th Group as our ground force. And we just trained every single day. And if we weren't flying, we'd go to the range and shoot. We had all kinds of ammo set aside for this. And so anyway, 6 months go by, we go back home, and it happens again the next year, right? So we're refining our dust landing techniques, our air refueling techniques, our shooting, and all this stuff. We didn't know it, but we essentially were preparing for post 9/11 operations. Everything from, we would always practice if aircraft separated, like if one went one way and one went another, and we were going to link back up somewhere else with a rendezvous, it always worked, right? Everybody showed up on time. I mean, that's what we do. And then the commander came in and he would tell you, maybe you're the third aircraft, and he'd say, you know what, don't show up. I want you to go around and go to our destination. And then, so nobody knew that except them. And then you get to the rendezvous point and somebody's missing, except you don't have the gas to go looking for him, and he's not answering the radio. What are you going to do? Right. So we always think, oh, we'll go get him. Really? Where is he? And
It's interesting, really.
yeah.
I mean, that's pretty incredible of the foresight of it, and it's not like he knew 9/11 was coming, but it's foresight to see the gaps in what we're doing,
Right.
and then to take the initiative and go, hey guys, we're working within our comfort zone, and that's not how the fog of war actually works. So good
Right.
on that
And
commander.
it turns out that it was very good that we did that, and because that Anaconda has a direct relation to that. Also, let me back up a little bit. When I was a W1 and a W2 time frame at the National Training Center, NTC, we would have competitions between aircrew to see who could do the hardest things with the aircraft. So the goal would be to carry as much cargo as you could in different ways, and then you would turn the automatic flight control system off, which was a stabilizing component in the thing, and it made a Chinook very difficult to fly. And nowadays you aren't even allowed to do that with a load. Like, you can still do it to practice, but you can't do it the way we did. And that also is why I'm sitting here talking to you right now. And I'll elaborate.
That's good foreshadowing.
Yeah. And so anyway, we did all this stuff with our commander, and we would get mad. This is never going to happen. And he's like, this happens. As a matter of fact, we flew out to Fort Carson, Colorado. We did a lot of high altitude stuff and a lot of supplemental oxygen, which also was helpful because we were training. We actually thought we were going to go to South America to do some counter drug and counterinsurgency operations with 7th Group. And so we were training for the Andes Mountains. So, high altitude, supplemental oxygen, power problems, that kind of stuff. So without even knowing it, we were training for Afghanistan, which in itself is its own beast, as you know.
And for those who don't know, who are watching or listening, and we don't have to get into the physics of flight and things like that, but helicopters are very unique animals in as much as the altitude. Everybody, Hollywood gives you that false image that you can just fly a helicopter anywhere, no big deal. It doesn't, the variables, the weather, the altitude, the thinness of the air, none of that matters. But in the real world, and I don't want to steal too much away from your thunder, but for those who are listening, in the real world, helicopters are very subjective and very finicky with everything from altitude and crosswinds and things like that. Would that be accurate?
That is very accurate. Yeah. I mean, airplanes are the same way, just, because we're in the helicopter community, you notice it. Out in Colorado, there's an airfield called Gunnison, right? It's out in a nice little resort area. And airplanes in the summer without certain power capacities cannot fly in there because they can't take off, and helicopters are the same way. But let's see. So we're training for all that. So we're out in Colorado, and the commander had us set up to meet an M1 tank crew, right? So there's an M1 tank out in the middle of Pinyon Canyon, which is the reservation out there, and we get out. We have a little meet and greet, talk it over a little bit, and he gives us a tour of the tank, right? And it's pretty cool. There's M1 Abrams, and that's well lit. It's roomier. It was a little tough to get in with our flight gear. It wasn't designed for that, but once you got in, it was not too bad. And I said, so you think you could shoot down a helicopter? That's what our boss is saying. He's like, oh, hell yeah. He goes, what do you think kills tanks? I'm like, other tanks? Artillery? He goes, yeah, but helicopters. I can't do
Huh.
anything about artillery. Tanks, we can fight, but helicopters, we got to fight as well. And I said, I don't believe you, right? So I looked in the optics, and he goes, just hold the joystick all the way to the left. I'm like, slowly? He goes, no, just cram it over. So the damn thing spins around. I'm looking through the targeting optics, and it was clear as a bell, right? I was like, holy crap, this is something. I said, well, I'll show him something he doesn't expect, right? So I get out, I crank the aircraft, and now I'm going to fly against him, a couple of times, right? And we got to come in kind of low. There's some undulating terrain, but it's not a lot of stuff in between him and me. And so I slow down to about 70, 80 knots so I can have maximum, kind of turning, right? And it's like I'm in a mogul field skiing, and he can't see me. And all of a sudden I pop up and I accelerate to like 160. And I'm past him. I'm like, yes, I got him. I snuck up, and I hear the laser detector saying, laser, 6 o'clock tracking. I'm like, damn it, he got me, right? So
Right.
I came from different directions. I could sneak up on him every single time. I couldn't get past him, without some kind of terrain to mask me.
Yeah.
So the lesson there was that, you know, for years we've been talking about, anti-aircraft artillery, missiles and such, and what we were doing is relearning what was actually a threat to us, which, nobody thought of RPGs as threats to aircraft until Mogadishu.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what brought me down.
So first of all, interesting because now everybody's teed up. Like, so you said you can't get past the tank. Altitude, um, all kinds of things, right? Obviously, like all you said, all relevant. So take us through 9/11. You're still at special operations at the 160th. Um, when you go over to Afghanistan in '02, was that your first deployment to Afghanistan, or over? Was it a first post 9/11 deployment?
It was. I actually was there in right after 9/11. So about 3 weeks after 9/11, I was in Uzbekistan.
Wow.
Yeah. So 9/11 happens. So the 10th of September, we're flying at the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana, JRTC.
Yeah.
And we're doing, actually, of all things, a riverine infill and putting boats
Mm.
in with a special boat unit, and they're linking up with the SOCRs, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to take them further upriver and do, some kind of like, Apocalypse Now kind of thing. So we do that, we get back, and that night we had another crew do a simulated shoot down. So they're out walking in the swamps for, 7, 8 hours. Then they get rescued, and so they're in there. We're staying in these barracks, these National Guard barracks at Camp Beauregard, and you've been in these buildings, right? The tile floor, tile walls, the echoes are terrible, right?
Yeah.
So
The
if you're
old
trying to
World War
sleep,
II era. Yeah.
yeah,
Never been
and
touched
so
since they were built. Yeah.
and I hear somebody, down the hall going, "Holy crap! What was that? Did you see that?" I'm like, "Oh, come on, right?"
Yeah.
So I get up and I open the door. I'm like, "All right, guys, come on, shut up, right?" And they're like, "No, no, no, turn your TV on." So I turned on the TV and saw one of the towers was burning, and the people were saying, "Oh, an airplane hit it." And I'm thinking, "Wow, that's kind of screwed up." That happened to the
Yeah.
Empire State Building before,
Yeah.
back in the
Right.
30s. I was like, "Wow, that somebody's gonna be really messed up for that to happen." And so I get some coffee and I'm watching the news, and then in comes another one. It's like, okay, that's no accident.
Yeah.
This is an attack of some sort. So I run down the hallway telling everybody, "Hey, get up, get up! We're under attack." And the guys that were out doing the escape and evasion are yelling at me like, "Go away! Get out of here!" I'm like, "No, no, no, let me in!" Right? And I'm banging on the door,
Yeah.
and they finally opened the door, and I showed them the TV, and they're like, "Oh crap!" So
Yeah.
anyway, everything's
As the saying
grounded.
goes, shit just got real.
Yeah, and so everything got grounded, even us. Right? There's fighter
Yeah.
planes flying, but no airlines,
Yeah.
no unessential aircraft. So we rented a car. The battalion commander and I drove up to Fort Campbell. I think it was like, I don't know, 8, 10 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
And the next day, we got a briefing from the intel guys on, the assassination of Ahmed Mashud, right? The lion of the mountains or whatever they call him, right? And that was in conjunction with this from Al Qaeda, so that we wouldn't have anybody to help us, attack them.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure out now how to deal with that. So one more day passes, and I'm in a van with like 5 other guys driving to Tampa from Fort Campbell, and that's a, I don't know, 12-hour drive or something. And we go to a SOC Cent, right? So Southern, it was at
Special Operations Command Central.
Special Operations Command, Central Command, right?
Yeah.
So it's right across the street from CENTCOM. So we're down there planning personnel recovery, right? So now if a bomber, a fighter gets shot down, we're going to go rescue them. And as soon as we started doing the numbers, running the performance characteristics, we were kind of shocked. I mean, we'd done all this stuff in the mountains, but we'd never have to fly as far as we did, having to go over the mountains sooner. So what that meant was there's some trade-offs, right? In order to fly 200 miles, you might need, a certain amount of gas. And then if you want to carry people or cargo, they weigh something, and you throw them on there with the gas, right? And then you find out that the aircraft is too heavy. So something's got to give. Either you got to get rid of fuel or you have to get rid of people, right? And let me tell you, in peacetime, we'd always trained, we always said there's always room for one more Ranger, right? So you'd say, okay, we can have 30 people on board, and like, 10 guys would come up, "Hey, you got room for us?" "Sure, get on." And we,
Yeah.
now there's 40 after we said we couldn't do 40, and off you go, right? And that's how we trained everybody, SEALs, Rangers, SF, they were all convinced we could just carry whatever
Yeah.
they wanted
Make
us
it
to
work.
carry,
Yeah.
right? So here we are doing these numbers going, there's no way we can't do anything the way we want to do it. Whenever we did fuel
I'm sorry
planning.
if I'm stop you. So when you say you're
Yep.
doing the numbers, when you say now you're looking at Afghanistan, you're looking at the height of the mountains, and you're thinking when you say I'm doing a number, we're doing the numbers, you're actually starting to calculate fuel burn rate, things like that. What is it gonna take for us to get up and over these mountains, or this distance at this altitude, this fuel consumption rate,
Right.
and how much can we carry additionally? And so now you're starting to look at we have to make these trades where we, as you said, we used to be able to just throw it on because it's all fictional
Right.
training. Now you're actually putting like real metrics to what is the real environment. Is that right?
Right. And the thing is this. So, I might normally be able to carry, 30 people, right, without any trouble, and still fly, for 5 hours if I had an internal tank. With the air
Yeah.
refueling, you can do more, and we'll talk some more about that.
Yeah.
But it came down to To take off out of Uzbekistan, the first thing you did was cross a 12,000-foot mountain. So you could barely carry nothing to get over the top of that mountain. So what we would do is drop down on the other side, link up with an air refueling tanker, an MC-130, and that would give us the gas for half of the mission. Because then you'd run down across the northern plains, get up over the mountains, and then do your thing. And then when you came back heading north again, you had to get gas again, or you wouldn't
Yeah.
make it home. So this is something we'd never, I mean, we'd always done that, but we always planned on a alternate source of fuel. So if you couldn't get the tanker or you couldn't get on the tanker for whatever reason, you always had a backup plan to go do it. You never were air refueling dependent,
Okay.
right? And in this case, we were air refueling dependent. So our comfort zone is now no good, right? I mean, we're not happy
Yeah.
with this, but this is how we're going to be. And we always had a spare aircraft. So we had 4 helicopters there, 4 Chinooks and 3 DAPs. Those are the armed Black Hawks. So 2 of those were primary mission birds, and the other one was a spare. Well, we wanted a spare Chinook, but we didn't have it, right? So that was always part of the plan is, if something breaks, you got another Chinook. In this case, there was none of that. So as a matter of fact, my very first mission, I went in single ship, which, is something you always dream of, it's in the movies
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
but in reality, you don't want to be, there's nothing overhead, no fighters, no bombers, no armed escort, and that's kind of how it was.
It's interesting that what you're saying is because again, I think Hollywood gives you that false sense. I've been fortunate to have spent enough time in the special operations community and been so fortunate to fly with some guys from the 160th that I think I have a little bit of a sense of just a little inkling that what you see in Hollywood is certainly like the gunfights with the guys that have like that never change a magazine because it's
Right.
unlimited ammo, and
Yeah.
it's almost the same thing with flight operations here, and I don't think that the average person watching or listening to this podcast may I don't know if the average person's aware of the complexity of you said that we can barely get up over the mountains. And this isn't to go like, do Rambo mission. This is just to get the first leg of our transit. And we have to refuel just to fly over the plains and then get to the target and do what we want to do, fly back. And to get back over that mountain, we have to refuel again. And again, there's such a complexity of the logistics, just as you said, not to get, thousands of rounds so we can drop bombs just to simply get to our destination and get up and over a mountain. It requires an enormous amount of planning.
Right. And then throw in there the height of the mountains is such that you have to wear supplemental oxygen, right? So you're limited to how much oxygen you have on board as well. And so how long you can fly.
Yeah.
That's a consumable item. It's just like being a scuba diver. You can only go so far. And when the tank's empty, it's empty.
Yeah.
And I got a whole story about for another time, maybe everybody but me being hypoxic because the oxygen systems failed except mine. But the other thing that was a challenge is the weather. So, you know how weather models work, right? I mean, as years go by, you record data and then the computer develops modeling predictions, right? Well, the Soviet Union had been responsible for most of that, and it was all goofy and wrong. And Afghanistan's so big and so diverse in its terrain that no one model seems to work. So the weather forecasting was really hindered. The Air Force forecasters did their best, but they really didn't have much to work with. And the problem was at that time of year, you had blowing sand across the dunes, what they call 120 days of wind. It was sort of toward the end of that. And you had mountains obscured with clouds, so you can't visually get over them. So we were lucky enough to have what's called a terrain following radar, the MMR, multi-mode radar. And so the radar could fly in most visual obstructions at 100, 300, or 500 feet above the ground, right? And you can't see out the window at all. But you think they let us do that in real life? No, not in the peacetime. It was in the simulator,
Yeah.
where you're replicating it. And if you did it for real, at night, it is the best we could do is go out at night, flip your night vision goggles up, and the other guy in the other seat would keep his down as a safety pilot.
Sure.
And then you'd follow the terrain following cues. But they would, in order to actually fly in instrument meteorological conditions, it was a general officer approval, right? So, and it never worked out. You couldn't get the bad weather and the general and, all
Yeah.
the line up, So here we are having to fly in these mountains with the multi-mode radar that we've never actually used. I mean, we've toyed with it, but we haven't actually relied on it for life and death. And the problem with that damn thing is it would reboot for no reason, right? You just going along and it would just have some reason that a little electron hiccup and it would say TF data bad, full climb. And all you could do is climb to the highest altitude you could get to. And, some of
Yeah,
that was
which
lessons.
if as some context, if you are flying 100 feet off the ground, which for those who don't know anything about aviation, 100 feet on the ground, off the ground, you might as well be an inch off the ground. Like that's very, very low. There are trees and telephone lines that exceed 100 feet off the ground, right? So that's very low. But if you're flying 100 feet off the ground in pitch darkness, and your system goes down, that's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
my very first mission, we weren't planning on what we call TFing. And, lessons were learned pretty quick, over the course of a couple of missions. And one of them was that horse soldier mission, which was, I flew them in, ODA 595, and we made the movie about them. And I was flying along with two DAPs, the Armed Blackhawks on my wings, and they just couldn't hang with the weather. So they turned around and it was just me. And the battalion commander was in my jump seat, which is the little seat behind the pilots. And he goes, Al, what are we going to do? And I said, sir, I think we just TF. And he's like, all right, do it. And I'm like, all right. It's like press the button and off we went. And the very first turn, we got a full climb command, meaning that we didn't have the performance to get over a mountain that was in the way. And it turns out there was about a 12, 13, 14,000 foot mountain right in our path. Even though we were going to turn prior to it, the radar doesn't know that.
Yeah.
So I had to figure that out. A little drama for a few minutes there, and we survived. And so there's some lessons to be learned there that we applied later on. With how you planned your route, and how often you had to turn, and keep in mind the radar sees about 10 miles out, for climbing. So that's all
so,
stuff we had to do.
so take us up to uh, March 2nd, 2002. Now you've had some experience in Afghanistan. Um, Pretty big. So for those who don't know, Operation Anaconda, um, uh, up in the valley, and I actually printed off. I actually read a pretty comprehensive article that talked about it and illuminated some things that I didn't know even from listening to some of the classified debriefs years ago. But up in the Shai-Kot Valley, the goal of it. Well, first of all, I read it's something interesting. I read in the article in this article, and they pulled it from Tommy Frank's American Soldier book. A lot of it was, first of all, I wasn't aware that the Soviets had done a lot of offensives in that area and had learned a lot of lessons, namely that being that it sucks and it's very, very challenging terrain. But so up in Shakot, there was um, this was when I'm reading March 2nd. The operation, the plan anticipated the operation would take 3 days, with the heaviest of fighting occurring on the first day. This is in March 2nd of 2002. It says estimates because of hard attempts to gather information were hard. The terrorists hampered by the valley's inaccessibility, rugged terrain, and the enemy's skill in camouflaging his sight. This resulted in a paucity of facts that led to an intelligence OS estimate overly dependent on guesswork and blah, 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 blah. And it says 200 to 300 lightly armed, demoralized terrorists scattered throughout the valley, not concentrated in any one point. So supposed to take 3 days, 200 to 300 lightly armed, demoralized. And we know typically that the bad guys don't like to fight in the winter, or that's the supposition. So going into the operation, anything that like any sixth sense that said, boy, things are going to go south on this one.
No, actually. So first of all, it was a conventional operation. We originally weren't even involved in the planning. And this was about 7 months in for us, and we were getting ready to go home. Our unit was going to have a relief in place, a RIP, with our sister company, and we just, wanted to go. And they said, hey, as soon as this Operation Anaconda is done, you guys can swap out and go. Well, the one thing that's not in what you just read is that it was delayed 2 weeks for weather, right? And what do we do? We're so friendly to the locals. We got the word out to all of the the civilian leaders and the NGOs, right? The UN, Red Cross, Red Crescent, so they could have their people out of there. Hey, whatever you do, get your people out of here. Oh, why? Well, so the bad guys that weren't actually demoralized were pretty energized by the fact they knew this thing was coming, and they had all these cool hiding places. So that's what started things off. And so the other thing is, for the entire 6 or 7 months leading up to that, I had a lot of stuff shot at me, man pads, RPGs, 23 millimeter projectiles, and it always missed. And I have this saying that I use especially after this, which was, miss by an inch, miss by a mile, a miss is a miss, but a hit is a hit, right? So, but anyway, so it's delayed, and we're going to go down and do it. And what also isn't in there is they thought that the big three were there. So Bin Laden, Zawahiri, and Mullah Omar, right? So my job in the whole thing, by now we had 7 Chinooks there, and my job was I was the quick reaction force not quick reaction force. I was the HVT flight lead, so high value target. So I would be the leader of that, right? So my role was just to sit back, watch, and if Bin Laden, Zawahiri, or Omar pops up, I take the SEALs down and we schwack them. Then we got roped in. We had my friend Andy ended up, he was the flight lead responsible for infilling coalition forces into the mountains to observe. And that was the anvil, the hammer and the anvil is what Anaconda is, right? So they would be in positions on key terrain and monitoring avenues of approach where they could call, airborne fires onto anybody fleeing or coming onto the objective. And then you had another flight lead who was Chuck Gant, and he was Razor 01. He was the actual QRF leader, although he assisted in putting in the coalition forces. So there's some real confusion with call signs, and we can sort that out if we need to later. But so there I am sitting back. The 101st and the 82nd go in with their Chinooks, and they are getting their butts handed to them, because the enemy is ready, right? And there's only so many places you can land, and the Soviets landed in those places, and the fighting positions were designed to, interlocking fires, to fight against helicopters landing there, right? And so they had a hard time. They considered pulling out on the first day because things didn't go as planned. And then they got a foothold, took the advantage, and then they were satisfied they were there. But what they needed was eyes on a piece of key terrain to help with fires. And this was Takur Ghar, later to be named Roberts Ridge, right? So I'm not doing anything. Obviously, Bin Laden's not there. He would have shaken out sooner. So now they're like, all right, Al, forget about Bin Laden. Take these SEALs up to the top of this mountain. And actually, it was to the base of the mountain at that time.
Base first, right? That was the original plan, was to
they would walk
go
up
into
under
the
the
valley.
cover of darkness. Yeah.
You're going to land in the valley. They're going to hike up the mountain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So but there's 2 teams, right? So I have 2 Chinooks and I have 2 teams, but they're going to 2 separate locations. So remember earlier I talked about, if somebody doesn't show up at a rendezvous, what do you do? Because gas could be an issue. Well, at this time in Afghanistan, there's no fuel in Afghanistan to speak of, except for Bagram, right?
Yeah.
And so what you take off with is what you got, right? And even air refueling where we were wasn't really a good idea. So, we take off, we land, we link up with our SEALs, we come up with our thing, and we go to take off. And as we take off, there's a B-52 strike coming in on what they call the whale, which is a key piece of terrain, looked like a whale. And that's where the enemy was concentrated. So we had to go back to Gardez, which is where we had operated from, and sat and wait. Well, in the meantime, we're burning fuel, and I don't have a lot of fuel, right, because of performance issues, right? So I still got to So we didn't even go with a full tank of gas because we wouldn't have enough power to get to the top of the mountain or over the mountains. So then the
This is March 4th now. So the operation
March
kicks
3rd.
off March 3rd. Sorry, The operation kicks off March 2nd. The 101st, the 82nd. There's some conventional activity. March 3rd. Nothing's really gone sideways. I mean, other than you guys have pushed it 2 weeks. Nothing's really gone sideways. Right. Now, early morning hours of March 3rd. A little bit delays. Again, just the normal. Right. No fight survives first contact even before you get off the ground, right? Even
Right.
competing logistics within the United States military, a B-52 strike sends you back to burn fuel. Now, again, so you can just start to see the compounding.
And that also, where we were going to land had an AC-130 overhead, right? And he had his sensor scanning our landing zone, and he said, it's all clear, you going in. And of course, the B-52 strike drives him out of the air, right? So he's got to leave as well. So now I don't have eyes on the area, and I'm burning gas. So then they clear me to go in. AC-130 starts to come back in at the same time, and then we get told to clear out because there's 101st Air Assault with 10 aircraft coming in, and we got to get out of their way. So we go back to Gardez again, and now I realize the only way we're going to do this is I've got to shut the aircraft down. And I didn't want to do that because the aircraft I was flying had a propensity for maintenance problems when you start the engine up again, when it was still warm, right? So I did not want to shut it down. And so we go back, we shut down, and they finally clear us to go in. We get a new AC-130, right? Because the other one was out of gas.
Yeah.
And so now we're talking to him about, what we want and such.
And just to be clear, for those who are listening in, you guys, and even so, you guys have on board. You're not, again, Hollywood maybe has that you guys just have guns sticking out all over the place on a Chinook, the big lumbering Chinook aircraft. You have, and it says Razor 3. If you didn't have any air cover, Razor 3 would have to insert with only its electric powered miniguns for defense. So you're not going in armed to the teeth with missiles and rockets on your helicopter. That overhead cover was Big Brother going with you, and without that, you're not going in very well defended as an individual aircraft. Is that right?
Right. That is correct. And then here's what you got to understand as well. So with every weapon, right, there is a rule of engagement, right? There's rules of when you can and cannot shoot and what you can and cannot shoot. So on March 2nd, I believe it was, so the first day of Anaconda, part of the hammer and anvil is the hammer was actually General Zia's force, right? He's an Afghan general.
Yeah.
And he's being assisted by a Special Forces ODA, right? And they're in a convoy and they're driving down to meet the enemy. And the AC-130 overhead at the time believes them to be an enemy convoy. So they engage, right? They kill it's a fratricide event, and they kill the Special Forces guy, named Harriman, a warrant officer. And
to be clear, like when we talk about they engage, American forces shot. I mean, we have to call it what it is because it's again it happens in the fog of war. American forces shot other American forces because they just mistook them for enemy.
Right, and and along with that, it was such a they did their job very well with the 40 millimeter, and it was such a horrific attack that the Afghan force ran in the opposite direction. They're like, holy crap, if they do that to the Americans, what are they doing to us?
Yeah.
And they don't know it's an AC-130. They just know that, this guy got torn up. So now there is no hammer to meet the anvil, right?
Wow.
And what happens is the rules of engagement change because of that, right? So now you put me in a situation where I can attack somebody who has hostile intent, which is very subjective. If I look at somebody's maneuvering, I can shoot them. Now I can't. Now we're in a weapons hold situation where I have to be fired upon before I can return fire, which when we talk a little bit further, you'll see why that was such a nasty thing for me.
I think for anybody, right, understand that you have to allow them to punch you in the face or have that fist on its way to your face before you're allowed to punch back. That's
right.
Yeah. In the rules of warfare, that's kind of that's tying one hand behind your back. or
Right.
both hands.
Right. So now, so we have minimal, protection anyway. The
Yeah.
AC-130 is my guy. And what I don't know at the time is that that's the guy that had the fratricide event. So he is in no mood to shoot
Yeah.
again anything that is not definitely an enemy, right? So, and based on some limitations with the sensors that we did not know at the time, you know, you got to remember this was the first big
Yeah.
battle of the war. I mean, we were doing, unconventional warfare, right? And little onesies and twosies. So all the stuff that was going on in the fog of war, and that, there was communications fratricide. So, there's aircraft jamming other aircraft, and you can talk to somebody 1 second, and then you can't talk to them anymore, which weighed heavily into what happened to Razor 01. But so we're gonna go down, and now we're gonna take off. And as we start the aircraft to go again, now that we've been cleared, we have a malfunction, and the engine has what we call a high side, and basically it's too much fuel goes into the turbines, and it just almost explodes. Right? I mean, we have techniques to deal with it, but a huge 20-foot flame came out the back. The SEALs were back there. They're like, "Holy crap, the hell was that?" I'm like, yeah, we're not taking this one to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they can't fit. So we have this other SEAL team as well that also has to get in. They're going to another location, so they got to go with me. So I call back to Bagram, which is where we were based, and said, "Hey, you got to send me a spare aircraft
Oh.
because this one is non-mission capable." And they said, "Okay, Razor 01 just got back. He's in the fuel pits right now, getting gas. We'll send him right down." And it's about a 45-minute flight.
Sure.
So he just got there. He's getting gas. Add another, call it an hour. And by the time he did that, and then we flew to the landing zone, the SEALs felt they would not have time to walk up the mountain under the cover of darkness, right? So they'd be very exposed. So
So
the
a series of events, everything from shutting the plane down, the other aircraft having to cause your delay because they had to do a bombing run, a series of delays. Again, it's the second and third order effects. It's the snowball rolling down the hill
right,
starts to lead towards. All right, so now the SEALs, you can't put them down in the valley because they have to climb up, and the only way they can do it safely is in the dark. We can't get them there in the dark. And landing in the valley was not necessarily the safest, but the best for all the competing priorities for what you had to factor in. The aircraft, the SEALs, what they had to do, what you had to do, the capability of the aircraft. Landing in the valley is the best option. Now that's not an option. So yeah, kind of want to set that stage.
right. And think about this. So in 2000, 2001, 2002 even,
Yeah,
satellite imagery wasn't what it is today,
sure.
right? So I had back then imagery from 1993. It was 10-meter imagery, which is almost useless,
Yeah.
right? It's like a blurry picture, right? And so I couldn't even guarantee a landing area, which is a problem we had putting in the coalition forces over the previous days. And so I told the team chief, it was Britt Slabinski, right, who also got the Medal of Honor. I said, Slab, I can't get you up there. I don't even know if there's a place to land. And then, somebody else came up on the troop commander came up on the comms and said, "I've seen it. There's a landing area. No problem at all." And I said, "All right, well, I'll do it, but I'm not going to guarantee there's a place to land." And they were pretty confident I'd get him in. So we decided, we could do it. We could do it. And then I said, "Look, I don't recommend it, and so Slab, the team leader, actually called higher and said, 'Hey, look, can we get a 24-hour bump?' And he was told, 'Look, we're not going to tell you yes or no, but it's really important you get up there. It's crucial.'"
Yeah.
And so, from our perspective, I mean, that's saying you got to go.
Yeah.
So,
That's what the
so we're
FBI
like,
calls a clue. Yeah.
yeah, they always, they'll tell you, "Well, I didn't tell you you had to do it." It's like, no, right. We're going to do it. So, we crank, we head that way, and here's the other bit of confusion, right? So the aircraft that came down to replace mine, we were trying to save time, right? So the crew chiefs recommended that only the pilots change aircraft. So I would run, me and my co-pilot ran over to the new incoming aircraft, and those pilots got out and got into my broken aircraft, and they would deal with it with a maintenance pilot. So now I had an enlisted crew who I'd never met before in the back of the aircraft. And the
Okay.
same thing happened with my Chalk 2. He did it. He also was in an aircraft. He'd never met the crew before. They were from our other company.
Yeah.
So we'd give a quick brief. I mean, we should all be fairly standardized,
Sure.
and we should be able to do this, right? So we take off, and the plan now is we'll take off as a flight of 2. The second aircraft, my wingman, will break off, and he'll land in the valley where objective Remington is, right? There's a big battle going on. And I'll continue on up to Takur Ghar, put my guys in, and then we will link back up at a location, that we decided a little bit north of there, and then we'd go home together. And then the contingency I had was, as we learned earlier, was, all right, if one of us doesn't show up,
Yeah.
we're not going to have a lot of gas. I said, hold for 15 minutes and wait. And then wait at the end of that 15 minutes, you do a radio search, meaning you just break radio silence and try to communicate. If you get nobody, I said, you go home,
You got to. Yeah.
right? Because you're
You're not going to crash. Yeah.
we don't have enough gas, and
Yeah.
you don't know where the other guy could be. It could be me, it could be him, but there's no telling with this big battle going on, right? And whatever brought him down is likely to bring the other guy down.
Yeah.
Which is important as well. And we'll see later. So anyway, I don't show up. Well, let's go. I guess I got to back up here, right? So we go to the top of the mountain, and he drops off, to the lower valley, and so now we're separated. The AC-130 is overhead, but he has seen no enemy on top of the hill.
Yeah.
Right.
What could go wrong?
Right. It's snow-covered landing zone. There's footprints up there. It's about 12,500 feet high, and there's footprints across the landing zone. Now that in itself could be hokey, but we've been up to 20,000 feet and seen footprints in the middle of nowhere, and it's like,
Sure.
That's just what else you got to do if you live in Afghanistan, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
Walk around, right? So that in itself wasn't a abort criteria. So we land, we don't see anybody, and then all of a sudden,
You land up at the top of the mountain now.
the top of the Takur Ghar mountain,
Right. So you're going to put in the valley. They say we can't get up the mountain in time before under the cover of darkness. Let's put us in the top of the mountain. Bad imagery. We're not even sure that it is a good landing spot. Somebody says, Mack, I've seen it. You can get there. You say, okay. Brit asked for the day delay. They say no. Now now you're going, and now you finally get to the top of the mountain, and the AC-130 overhead says, hey, barring some footsteps, we don't see anything that would, tell you like, hey, have some, have your spidey senses on alert.
right?
Okay.
Right. And the other thing is, we'd been there all these months, and I mentioned I'd had a lot of stuff shot at me,
Yeah.
and I always missed, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was a little numb to the fact that I could be
Yeah.
hit, right?
Yeah.
So here I am on the ground. The SEALs, and back then, this is another problem that was fixed after this, is the team was not on communications with the helicopter crew. So the team leader would take off his, pelter, and he'd put on an aircraft headset. So he can't talk to his guys. He can only talk to the pilots. And then we land. I give him a sit rep. I go, hey, hold on a second. There's a Dishka, which is a 14.5 millimeter machine gun off to the right. Nobody's on it. Also, you see that stuff all over the place in Afghanistan from post-Soviet stuff. And then somebody says, oh, there's a donkey out there. Like, hey, there's a donkey, right? So in the meantime, his team members are inching toward the ramp, ready to get out, and he's trying to look out the window to match up what I'm telling him with what he can see.
And we're talking about seconds here.
Right.
It's not like you land, everybody, goes and has a cup of coffee and then figures out. We're talking about within mere seconds. And when you say you land, you literally do put the wheels on the ground. Is that right?
Yeah. Right.
So you put the wheels on the ground, and it's not like you put the wheels on the ground, then the ramp opened up, and then everybody took around. We're talking about all of this happening within milliseconds, right? You
Right.
land, you make communications back with Brit or whoever it was. I guess it was probably
Yeah.
Brit, right? To say,
It was Brit.
hey, hold on a sec. And so this is happening very, very real time. I think that's something almost going to gets lost in translation.
Yeah. And then about that time, we had a guy stand up at about our 9:30, 10 o'clock, kind of in the tree line.
Yeah.
Once again, if the rules of engagement had been the way they were the day before, I'd
Yeah.
have killed him on the spot.
Yeah.
Because there's not supposed to be any friendlies up there. But you never know what's going on now. So now he's got to shoot at me before I can shoot him.
Yeah.
So I say, Slab, what do you want? Do you want to take off or do you getting off the aircraft? He says, we're taking the LZ. And right about that time, that guy
Taking the LZ meaning we're getting off the plane. We're getting off the aircraft.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the unknown person ducks, and the crew chief, the gunner, says he disappeared. I don't know where he is. And I said, if he pops up again, kill him, because now I decided that would be a hostile act.
Sure.
And he does pop up, except he's further off to our front, more like 11 o'clock. And I see him as I see an RPG tracking toward me, right? Like it's like something out of like Black Hawk Down in the movie.
Yeah.
They get this lava lamp with sparks coming out the back.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. It's like in slow motion almost.
Yeah.
And the thing comes in and it hit just behind me.
When you say hit, you mean not inside the aircraft?
Well, it hit the aircraft and went through it.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So it went through
I don't
like
think I ever knew
the
that.
left. It went through the left ammo can and went out the right ammo can. So even if we had electric power after this, the belt fed machine guns weren't going to work. But so there's a big explosion inside the aircraft, and the only reason it didn't kill anybody, there was some shrapnel damage, is that there's no overpressure because it's designed to go into armor, overpressurize, this hot jet of magma, plasma, or something. I don't know.
Hey,
And
I want to stop you for 1 sec if I can. I suddenly saw a helicopter, so began calling out warnings. They saw people and no signs of humanity. A rocket-propelled grenade shot past the Chinook. It was followed moments later by a second RPG that ripped through the helicopter's fuselage and exploded, rendering the miniguns useless. Was there a first one?
No, that was the first one.
Okay,
There
so
was
this,
there was thoughts that there was more than one, and I'll elaborate that in a second.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
sorry.
anyway,
Yeah,
so the thing hits us, it explodes. The team, the SEALs, were starting to head for the ramp, and now they don't know what they're going to do, I guess, because it's a big explosion. There's fire inside the aircraft, and I can't talk to anybody.
not gunfire, actual fire.
Well, there's fire, and gunfire. So now there's
Okay.
machine gun fire coming through, and you can hear it like in the movies, the ting, 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 ting.
So the RPG was just the initiation of a whole volley of bad guys now unloading on you.
Right.
Okay.
And then, so the aircraft, the cockpit has 4 TV screens. They're called MFDs, multifunction displays. And that's where all of everything is displayed for the pilot, right? So without electricity, those turn off, and it's dark out, and is boom, and all of a sudden I hear the fans spooling down. So you just they all these black boxes have little fans in them, like a computer,
Yeah, like
right?
a computer, right?
And you can hear the whir of those fans, and when they turn off all at once, it's just sort of and the aircraft was still running, right? So the aircraft can run on its own. The engines are, once they're started, they're
Yeah.
I can't remember what the term, but they just keep running. And so he hit, and now I don't know what to do, because I don't know if the team has started to get off yet, right? What I don't want to do is if they're halfway off, I need to let all of them off, or if they're going to get back on, I got to let them all back on. Except I can't talk to anybody. Nobody in the back is communicating.
And again, so just as some context, from the time you put down and said, "Hey guys, there's a Dishka off to the left and there's a goat," till the time you are now making a decision and ting 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 ting, gunfire's coming and you're trying to make a decision. We're talking a few seconds.
Yeah, it's a little longer than that. It was because it was more of an infill than an assault.
Yeah.
We were trying to take in, the dish, the donkey is probably about 40 seconds. I think about a minute total when you take in the fire and stuff, which is a long time.
Yeah, that's a long. Yeah.
But yeah. So then I hear from the back, my crew chief, who is not on intercrew communications, ICS, I can hear him yelling. He says, "Fire in the cabin, go, go, go." And so I took the controls from my co-pilot and I took off. Now, the rotors are no longer powered by, or the engines, I should say, are not powered by the primary fuel controls anymore because those are regular electric. So the reversionary system, the backup system, is now in play, and it's not as precise at maintaining rotor RPM. So when I pull up out of the landing zone, the rotors droop, right? They slow down. The rotors that
Okay.
are spinning slow, and you can hear that, right? And you can
Hmm.
feel it. So, I think I've lost an engine, right? And I know I can't fly with only one engine. There's not enough. We're too high. Uh, the mountains, like I said, 12,500. So I nose it over and I dive down the mountain. And the idea is to build up rotor RPM through the downward angle, and then get up to
You-
speed so that
You're
I
just going
can
to
do it.
use gravity
Yep.
to
So
just,
I'm going to
yeah.
do what's called an auto rotation. I'm going to land, basically, I'm going to crash land at the bottom of the hill using stored up rotor RPM, kinetic energy. And as I'm diving down, the crew chiefs come back up on the intercom, and now we're talking, and they're like, "Yeah, we both engines are running. Don't go to the floor." Right. So I level out. Sure enough, we're doing okay. I have no displays, so now I'm looking out the window looking for visual landmarks. And it's like, oh, there's the whale. There's the battle going on, and I'll just go north of that. So I turn around and they go, "Hey, by the way, we had somebody fall out." I'm like, what do you
So
mean
this
somebody
is
fell out?
this is the first time you've become aware of this.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So this is 10 seconds after we took off,
But you
and
take off and you go into a dive and you're in
right,
the dive for just a moment before somebody says, "Hey," it's interesting because you said that because apparently it seems like the crew chief kind of knew what you were intending. Is that right? Is
yeah,
that why he
yeah,
says, "Hey, by the way, hey,
yeah,
Mac, don't crash."
yeah. That's exactly it.
Okay.
So we level out, and they tell me that we had somebody fall out on the landing zone, which was Roberts.
Yeah.
And this is the insanity of the situation. This is my first real pitched battle,
Yeah.
and I said, that didn't happen. Get a head count.
Yeah.
And the guys are like, we watched him go out. I had my hands on him. He went out and said, get a head count. So yeah, okay, we got 10 people. Whatever. And so I said, all right, well, we got to go back and get him. And then I was reminded that we didn't have any defensive armament. We did have an M60 in the back right window, which is an older machine gun,
Yes.
7.62, and the crew chief did put some suppressive fire down in the turn, and then it had no longer any good as far as the angle. And so we're going to go back in now with no automatic flight control system. The engines are in reversionary. There's no electrical power, no guns, and we're going to go back and get him.
If I
Except
can
now
read, I want to just read one passage out.
yeah,
You forgive me. I just want
yeah, yeah,
to. It says your your crew chief, a right rear ramp gunner, Sergeant Dan Madden. The They were starting to slide down the metal ramp as you pulled up some of the seals, right? And this is where Neil ended up falling. But Madden, secured the helicopter by a flexible harness, managed to grab Neil by the boot. But when the Chinook violently shuddered, which is, as you mentioned, sort of that the rotor sort of catching up with you hitting the gas, I suppose, right? Or you can clarify. That's when Sergeant Madden lost his grip of Roberts. Roberts weighed 300 pounds because he was carrying a machine gun and an 80-pound pack, and he
yeah,
fell 10 feet into the snow. And if I remember from the brief, it was like waist deep snow.
yeah.
But so Madden secured in a helicopter. Neil falls out the back. You go into the dive down the mountain, and then it sort of kind of brings us to where we are. Is that
It's
accurate?
close. It's
Okay.
close. There's one thing that over the years, some of the stories have changed a little bit, but so Madden is crucial, right? So Madden is, as we take off, he gets shot in the head, in the helmet, actually, right?
Oh wow.
Which is where we thought a second RPG had come from, right? And really what it was is a AK-47 round lodged in the styrofoam of his helmet, right? It's just a plastic helmet, right? And we didn't find that till after we got back to Bagram. He goes, "Hey, look at my helmet. This is what knocked me down." And so if that bullet were, an inch lower,
Yeah.
and he's dead and we're all dead because what he did at that point. So as we come around, we're in the dive, we
Yeah.
level off. It was a guy named Pedraza was the crew chief that grabbed Neil. As so he's on one side of what they call the ramp hinge, right? So the ramp goes up and down like this,
Yeah.
and we never let the passengers go this side of the ramp until we're ready to go, because if you take off the ramp, we'll free fall, right?
Okay.
So he's back there, you know, one of the crew chiefs yells, "Go, go, go," and Slab had just given him the go sign. So he starts leaning into going. And then, he realizes we're taking off. And Pedraza, the crew chief on the left side, sticks his arm out, grabs him, and is pulled out of the aircraft with him.
This is Neil. Grabs Neil.
Grabs Neil,
Yeah.
but he can't stop. He's like 300 something
Yeah.
pounds, right?
Yeah.
With inertia. So he goes out, but he's now hanging from his gunner's harness, right?
So Neil falls out, but Pedraza also falls out, but is he's hanging outside off the ramp, off to the side of the aircraft, but he's still attached as you're soaring down the mountain.
Right.
Wow.
And so you could imagine, I mean, I shudder to think what would have happened if we had gone all the way down.
Yeah.
He would not have, I mean, there would have been nothing left of him.
No.
But so what Madden did, so as Madden gets me to level off and I start to turn because I'm looking for terrain, the whale,
Yeah.
and I can hear the M60 shooting, right? That's him trying to shoot the bad guys. And then he realizes Pedraza is hanging off the ramp. So he's like
Yeah.
4 or 5 feet below the ramp. So he
Gosh.
pulls him up. And then about that time, the controls run out of hydraulic fluid from bullet damage, and I can't move the flight controls. Right. And in a Chinook, you've got to have, imagine you're driving a car and you pull a key out and a steering wheel locks.
Yeah.
Right. That's what a Chinook controls do with no hydraulics. So I'm like, I'm like, guys, I can't move the controls. We're done. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so Madden is in the back. He gets Pedraza in, and he opens up a can, not much bigger than that. Like I don't what it used to be oil cans used to look like,
Yeah.
right? And he pokes a couple of holes in it, and he puts it in a little tank, really about the same size as that. And there's a lever, like the size of a freaking pen. He's
Yeah.
pumping it like this to get the fluid into the system.
This is a can of hydraulic fluid.
Hydraulic fluid. We had 3 cans of hydraulic fluid spare, right? Because Chinooks have a tendency of leaking a little bit, right?
And
So
is this the proper way? I mean, even in a wartime city, is this the way of? Let me rephrase the question. Had he ever put hydraulic fluid in by just poking holes and putting it in and
yeah,
pumping it this way? Okay. Okay.
yep,
So
yeah. This is kind of like it's a Chinook thing, like since
okay.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
So you always have a bottle opener. The
Yeah.
old fashioned. You got the pointy end on one, and
Yeah.
they always have those there on a string. And 3 cans of hydraulic fluid and what they call the lightning holes, which are these holes along the ramp,
Okay.
and they're always there. Every Chinook you get in will be just like that. So he gets that. He puts the first can in, and the controls come back. And we've just been talking about, there's somebody on the LZ. I got to go back and get him. And so we turn, and that's when the controls locked up. Then he puts in the fluid,
Okay.
and now I can move the controls again. I said, all right, we got controls are restored. Let's go back. So we start heading back in again. And as soon as I level out to line up on the LZ, the controls freeze again. Right. So now it's obvious to me that
Yeah.
this isn't going to work. I can either crash on top of the hill, which isn't going to go well with all the bullets, or I can, if we restore the controls again, I can probably get down to where all the friendlies are. So they put fluid in again, and each can lasted about 50 seconds, as near
Oh
as I can
wow.
tell. So,
And there's only 3 cans to start with.
3 cans, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm not, I mean, it's after the fact that I can say, oh, it was about 50 seconds, right? I mean, at the time it was like, all
Yeah.
right, I
Yeah.
get control. Oh, crap, I don't, And so now we're headed, I decided we got to abort. We cannot go onto the hill again. So we're headed down, and we set up a rate of descent and an airspeed that, in my mind, if the controls locked up again, maybe it would be a survivable crash. It's like so I set up, it was like 300 foot a minute, which is what we do dust landings at anyway.
Okay.
So I thought, as long as there's nothing to run into, we could conceivably survive. We'll probably roll or whatever. And then just before we got to the ground, maybe 30 feet from the ground. So you've done parachuting, right?
Yeah.
So you get down to about 100 feet,
And you
7,500
flare.
feet, you let it fly.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, you couldn't let it fly because it stopped working again. So the aircraft, I was headed for like a little sort of a flat area surrounded by hills,
Yeah.
except as we came in, I could no longer move the controls. And so the aircraft started sliding on its own as we slowed down. And I knew we were going to essentially there's a hill here, so we would hit that roll and blow up, kind of thing. And then, so what I did is I kicked in the pedals, right, with your feet,
Yeah.
and I still had fluid in that axis. So now the aircraft is sliding on its own. I can't stop that, but I kicked the pedals in the direction of the slide. So now we're going to at least hit straight on.
Okay.
Right. And then as soon as we hit the ground, I had one more movement in the power control, the thrust, and I did that. And we actually settled on the ground. It was like a 20-degree cross slope, which is big for an aircraft, and
Yeah.
about a 15 degrees nose high. And we didn't roll, we didn't blow up. We were settling right there on the valley floor.
Wow. So that this is crazy just because of all the things that have transpired, and this, we're not even into the meat of what has
Yeah.
yet to come, right? And I can't find that part of the um, everyone who was not injured in the bone jarring landing, which is what you just described, right? As you said, it's interesting. You said in you're in the last 30 feet of descent, and you're talking about seconds now.
Yeah.
You start to it locks up. You start sliding sideways, just in a moment of clarity. Hit the pedals, rotates the helo. You hit nose up and slightly angled, but still it says everyone who was not injured in the bone jarring landing rushed out, formed a defensive perimeter, and then kind of take us from there.
Yeah. So, of course, so you take from the time we lost electrical power to the time we land, I think that's
Yeah.
about 3 minutes or so, right?
Okay.
That flight, remember I talked about being at the National Training Center as a
Yeah.
W1, flying with the AFCS off, and
Yeah.
that, I can honestly say without being egotistical, I'm one of the best Chinook pilots when it comes to AFCS off flight. I did it all the time, right? I was
Yeah.
really good at it. So the fact that I was able to fly this thing down like that, I can attribute to that training. It just guys don't do that much anymore. It's just hard. It's like I don't want to do that. Let the aircraft fly itself. But anyway, so here we are on the ground,
If there was a
and
pilot that this was going to happen to, and again, not I appreciate your modesty, but if there was a pilot this was going to happen to, who was going to be able to save lives, you were one of the ones that it should happen to if we're going to survive this.
yeah, I mean, I could acknowledge that. I mean, there's
Sure.
pilots in general have a pretty big ego, but yet,
That's right.
it's embarrassing to accept that. But then again, I do acknowledge I'm a good pilot, one of the best I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so we were on the ground and we had been training. Remember, I said we were training in '99 and 2000
Yeah.
for some stuff, and our commander, I don't want to use his name, but he always made us do shoot down scenarios, right? So we did a lot. So here I am, I hit the ground, and we'll just say his name is Joe Gorst, right? That's how I named him in my book.
Okay.
So he called them Gorst games, right? And it'd be a shoot down. Like you'd land somewhere in the middle of nowhere. He'd hand you an envelope. All right, you've been shot down. There is enemy here, here, and here. Get to this point, right? And then you'd like walk in the woods for 3 days. It's like, damn it. So here we are on the ground. I shut the aircraft down and I actually said to my co-pilot, not another effing Gorst game.
Yeah.
He's like, yep. And so we jettisoned our doors and got out, and everybody got together. And it was funny because I'm running around the perimeter myself, right? Uh, got my GPS out. I'm trying to get a fix where we are. And, back then the GPS took a while to come up in little Garmin. And so while it's doing that, I'm checking on everybody. All right, this is your sector of fire. This is what you're doing. Everybody okay? and keep in mind, I didn't even know this crew, right? And it's dark out. I'm like, who are you? Tell me who you guys are. I'm Sergeant so-and-so. I'm Sergeant so-and-so. Like, okay, and
And the SEALs have now disembarked the aircraft as well, and they're out doing whatever it
yeah.
is.
Well, so
They're-
they're Chapman set up his radio, and Slab is just kind of surveying the area. The other guys are just pulling security, and they're trying to get coordinates for the aircraft as well, because we're planning on blowing it up. And while we're sitting there, Slab thought we were only quarter mile away from Takur Ghar, because it was a mountain right there, but it wasn't Takur Ghar. So he's like, okay, so and so is planning a route for me. We're gonna leave you guys here, and we're gonna go up the mountain. I'm like, it's like 10 miles away. And he's like, no, it's right there. I'm like, that is not Takur Ghar. That is Takur Ghar. And he's like, oh crap. And then his route guy looks up and goes, oh yeah, it's not good. We can't get there. So about that time, my wingman, Razor 04, has waited his amount of time. He realizes I'm not going to show. So he calls on the radio, hey, where are you, Razor 3? And the AC-130 checks in, a different one. Right now they've had a third AC-130 on station. He says, oh yeah, he got shot down. And he's like, how about a little more detail?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, he's at this location. They're on a
Okay.
security perimeter. So
And you
Razor
guys are
4,
not in comms with these guys at this point,
no,
with the AC-130.
no. So Chapman is.
Yeah.
Right. So he's the one that told them where we were.
Okay.
And what our status was. So
Okay.
Razor 4 is now on his way. So he's going to be here in about 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was. We were on the ground about 45 minutes total by the time it all worked out. But a funny story. So I run up to Slab and Chapman, right? And I've been doing all this stuff on my own, not even thinking I got a freaking platoon of SEALs with me, or a squad. And so I go up and I'm like, I'm all out of breath. I mean, we're at like 9,800 feet, and I've been running around, and I'm not used to being on the ground, so I'm trying to run, like a, ready position. I'm like, this is too hard. I was just gonna run, And so I get over there, and I'm out of breath, and I'm like, trying to explain the situation. And Slab looks at me and he goes, "Stop what you're doing and breathe." I'm like, but he goes, "Breathe," and it helped. And I used that later on for somebody else that needed it. But he was nice and calm. And Chapman was on the radio with the AC-130, and then they had a SATCOM out, and they were getting instructions on what we were going to do. And the plan was that my crew would stay where we were. This Razor 4 would come in and take the remaining SEALs back to Takur Ghar to get Roberts, and then get out. Then they come back and get me.
Is
But in the
Razor 04 empty? Are they coming in empty? No,
So
like
they're
no
empty.
SEAls? Okay.
Yep, they're empty. Yeah. Except they had some equipment on board from the previous SEALs. And they had more fuel, right?
Okay.
Because remember, these aircraft came down not configured for the mission. They were just like, had just topped off. So when he's in the aircraft, and Slab says, "Hey, just take us all up to the top." And he's like, "I can't take all of you to the top of the hill. I don't have enough performance. The aircraft will not lift everybody."
Yeah.
So that's why I had to stay there. And I look over at Slab and I go, I've never been on the ground before. Do you have somebody that can stay with me?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, somebody that understands, being flanked and, shit like that.
Yeah.
And he kind of looks at me like, what? And I'm like,
I'm a
never mind,
pilot.
but I was pretty embarrassed right then. It's like, I'm supposed to be able to, I mean, we train for this kind of stuff, I mean, we're all good with our weapons, but, do a whole lot of,
Sure.
ground maneuver. Right. So I'm like, never mind. Right. And he goes, okay, good. Because I want everybody. But so we put that out on the radio, and I can't remember who the call sign was. He was the guy at the AFO, the Armed Forces. I don't remember what that stands for anymore, but the fire base there at the forward operating base at Gardez. And he says, "You cannot stay where you are. There's enemy maneuvering on you right now. As a matter of fact, the AC-130 has been cleared hot to engage them. Get out of there." So
talking about you guys at your downed aircraft.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So everybody's getting on board Razor 4. He's just landed. And I survey the area. I'm looking around. It's like, okay, everybody is gone. I'm the last guy to get to the aircraft, and I start running for the aircraft. And this is kind of funny in that I like to relate a lot of things to movies. It's like,
Yeah.
if this were a movie, this is what would happen,
Yeah.
And I'm like, 20 feet from the aircraft. I'm out of breath already because of the altitude. And I'm like, if this were a movie, I'd be getting shot right about now as the crew
Yeah.
chief's reaching out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the crew chief is going, come on. And I'm like, ah, ah. And I freaking trip. Right. And I fall hard. I get the wind knocked out of me. And it's just, I just tripped. But I'm like, I got shot. And I'm like, no, I didn't. Oh, I'm okay. Right. But the crew chief thought I did. And he's like, so anyway, I get to the aircraft. We take off. They go back to Gardez. They reconfigure. They take our stuff off, and the SEALs drop all their big rucks and, the mountain rucks, and they head back in. And that gets the next phase of the story going.
So you are now, you do get on Razor Zero 04. Has headquarters given them the okay to go back in, or they
No,
asked
no, they haven't. So one of the after action points for
Yeah.
Operation Anaconda was there was no unified command or unity of command, right? So there wasn't one person in charge of everything, right? And a lot of the approvals and disapprovals were coming from Masira. They weren't even coming from Afghanistan. They were coming from SATCOM, somebody, 1,000 miles away or
Yeah.
several hundred miles. And then you couple in all of the communications fratricide we were talking about.
Yeah.
And, they asked for permission, but didn't get it. And he's burning gas.
Yeah.
So they're gonna go. Right. So they head back in and
Head back
and he
in
hit
to
back into
to
Takur Ghar.
okay. They are headed back towards Takur Ghar. Okay.
Right.
You're
So
on
they leave.
board. The old crew chief, or the old crew, the new crew, the new pilots, you guys, and Brit and the SEALs.
Right. So
Okay.
they fly us about 10 miles further north to the FOB at Gardez, right?
Okay.
And they drop all us off, drop the mountain rucks, and Jason takes off and hauls ass for Takur Ghar because he doesn't have a lot of gas. So he figures he has enough gas at this point to infill them, hold for about 15 minutes in case they need emergency exfil or Casevac, like they get him and it's time to come out,
Yeah.
and then make it back to us, and then he's done. There will be no
Yeah.
more gas left in that helicopter.
Yeah.
So they go
They'll be
up,
coming back on fumes if that were to happen. I got you.
right. And so before, while I'm riding with him, I give him an update on the, here's how I came in, here's where I landed, here's what the gun is, here's where, blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, got it, got it. And I actually said, hey, maybe I should take your co-pilot's place. And they both looked at me and they're like, no way. You're in shock. I'm like, no, I'm not in shock. No, you're in shock. He's like, besides, they had their chemistry going. They weren't about to let me in there. So they dropped me off. I, get picked up by the FOB people, and Razor 4 heads in with Slabs guys. So they come in and he tries to coordinate pre-assault fires with the AC-130. The AC-130 guys, as I mentioned before, at this time are not feeling it for pre-assault fires. They're just not going to shoot anybody that they can't be sure is an enemy. And we know we have a friendly up there. So they're not. So Razor 4 is like, all right, I need pre-assault fires on this location. And
So
the
for
AC-130
the
says yes.
layman, for the layperson, pre-assault fires means I just need permission to engage and some guidance.
Well,
Is that
in this case, he wants him to shoot either places people could hide or actual people. If he can see people, he wants them to kill them. If he can't see people, then he wants them to shoot, what we call templated areas where people could hide.
Sure.
Except they don't know for sure where Neil Roberts is, so they're not going to shoot. But they don't tell Jason that, or Razor 4. They're like, yeah, sure, come on in, right? So he comes in, he's like, all right, I'm 2 minutes out. We've got the landing area in sight, start laying down fire. And they go, yeah, we're not going to do that. And so he breaks off and he tries to negotiate a little bit with them, like, hey, what's wrong here? And they're like, oh, there's a friendly down there. And he's like, look, all right, I got it. So he heads back in. And now that Dishka that was unmanned for me is fully manned and fully operational.
this
And
is
his
out as
aircraft,
Jason's coming back into the top of Takur Ghar now.
right, with the
Okay.
SEALs. and he thought he could get the AC-130 to suppress the enemy. And now he's getting shot at by 14.5, which is about a 50 cal
It's
round. It's big.
again
It's a big
for the
bullet.
layperson. It's a big bullet coming at you.
Yeah, and it's ripping through his aircraft, right? I mean, it's hitting. I think I had 70 bullet holes in my aircraft after we recovered it.
Yeah.
He had similar damage, right? And he couldn't get his minigun. So as they're coming in, the miniguns are out to the side,
Yeah.
and they do have a little bit of traverse, front and back,
Yeah.
but not the way he was coming in. So he just had to take the punishment and get in there. And meantime, he's asking the AC-130. He's like, "I'm receiving effective fire.
Yeah.
Take out the gun." And they're like, "Negative. No, we don't know who's on the gun."
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of it has to do with that fratricide,
Sure.
And so Razor
Interesting.
Four, Razor
Uh,
Four continues.
right. Interesting discussion for another time about how our experiences play negatively into our reluctances later, and it's a human reaction to I made a mistake before, a one that cost human lives or American lives, and it played into that inability to act now. And I'm certainly
Right.
not second guessing or knocking the person who made that decision. It's just
No,
it's sort of an
and think
interesting.
about this. Think about this. They really didn't have time to talk about it, right? I
Yeah,
mean, the only way you improve on something like that is you talk about it, you digest it,
yeah,
you analyze it, and you figure, okay, what could we have done different?
yeah.
They didn't have time because they had the incident, and they come back for their crew endurance, their crew rest, and they're back out there again. And they really, as a community, didn't have time to talk about it. I mean, I not to get off the subject, but my boss introduces me all the time. He's like, "Oh, this is Al Mack, 36 years in the Army, 17 years special operations, got shot down in Afghanistan." And I was like, "Ooh, you're right." And I'm like, that was like the beginning of the war, and I was never successfully engaged again when I didn't intend it. Right? Is what I like to say, right? Because I learned a lot of lessons out of that, and I
Right.
applied them, for another 10 years. But anyway, so Razor 4 is on the way in. The enemy is got their having their way with him, the machine gun,
Yeah,
and he is able to land. And there's enough defilade that the machine gun can't hit him while he's on the ground. And the SEALs run out. And there's Predator ISR footage of them coming. They fan out and they
yeah,
run. There's a guy that falls right away. That slab.
yeah.
He's very proud of that because it was very, very deep snow. And then Razor 4 takes off and goes. He holds as long as he can, gas wise. There's no communications with the SEALs because they're now in a pitched firefight
Yeah.
with a
They're
belt
fighting
fed machine
uphill,
gun.
right?
Right. And they're being pushed off the hill essentially.
Yeah.
And that's its own that's a big story in
Yeah.
itself, right? So the medals of honor and such. But so Razor 4 is now literally out of gas. He's 15 miles from Gardez. So he comes back to us. He lands and the engines flame out. So when he lands, the aircraft has zero fuel in it.
Wow.
Zero, right? So that's kind of funny later on, so I go out to meet them, "Hey, you guys okay?" And I go, "Oh, we're out of gas." And I'm like, "If I got some fuel here, could we take it back up?" Right?
Yeah.
And the crew chief is having a fit. He's got like wire bundles in his hand. He's like, "You see these wire bundles? You know what they go to? Me either. I don't either. They're shot clean through, right?" And he goes, "This is shot, and this is shot, this is shot." And so the aircraft actually couldn't physically start if you tried to put gas in
Oh
it.
gosh, yeah.
So it took a couple of days of mechanics climbing over to put that back in service. But so that eliminated just getting gas because you can actually put like gas, like car gas in a turbine engine and it will burn it. It'll mess it up.
Sure.
They'll have to pull the engines after, but you can fly with it.
Yeah.
So I'm like
But
looking at a
if your
truck.
boys are up on the mountain getting their asses shot off, you can make it work and worry
Right,
about the damage to the engines later.
right. Except
Yeah.
in this case, they won't even start.
Yeah.
So it's like going out to a car you want to drive, but you don't have the key. And you're like,
Yeah, yeah, right.
ah. So,
So
I'm on the
now you've
phone.
lost. You said you had 7 aircraft, and so you've lost 2 now. One is buried. One is crashed at the bottom of the mountain. The other one now limps back and burns out, getting down on the ground now. Uh, so now you're down a few, and this is just in a matter of a few hours.
Right. So
Okay.
now keep in mind, Razor 4 came to get me, but Razor 1 and 2 have already launched from Bagram. They had just got back with Bagram with my aircraft.
Yeah.
They swapped into another one. So keep in mind, one of those aircraft is out of the picture anyway, right? So we're really down 3.
Yeah.
And so he's on his way back to rescue me, right? Except I get picked up by Razor 4, except he doesn't hear any of that, right? We have all this communications jamming going on, and he's
No
not
way.
hearing it. So he thinks he's coming to get me, and they
At the
fly
old crash
past.
site.
They fly past Gardez. Razor 1 decides, that's Chuck. He decides he doesn't know what's going on, so he sends his wingman to Gardez just to set down until he sorts through, because it's easier just to be on your own. And he gets to my aircraft, and then he gets the word Razor 3 is not at his aircraft. He's at Gardez. We need you to take the QRF, the Rangers, to the top of Takur Ghar at the following grid coordinate, which was my landing area. Now, this is where it gets, the fog of war, the comms jamming,
Yeah.
who's in charge. And there are people on the radio, you can listen to recordings now. I just heard some recordings a couple of months ago that I had never heard before, of people yelling, don't go in there, don't go in there, offset 800 meters here, whatever. And so he never got, the last word he got was to land in my landing zone, right?
Where the Dishka and everything else is up there just
Where
ripping people to
my
shreds.
aircraft got shot up.
Yeah.
Razor 3 or 4 got shot up,
Yeah.
and now he's coming in, and the sun's up, right? So he's coming in, and because the sun's up, the AC-130, which has got eyes on the hill, is starting to give a sit rep, and he says, hey, we got to go. Sun's coming up.
The
And
AC-130 says this.
the AC-130
Yeah.
leaves 30 seconds from Razor 1 touching down on top of the mountain.
No way.
Yeah, I just saw a recording, a video, the AC-130's sensor recording. Some SEAL buddies of mine are doing a documentary on it, and they had access to these recordings that I had never seen or heard. And there's the AFO commander, a guy named Pete Blaber, is on the radio begging them to hang out for just 3 or 4 more minutes. He's like, if you leave, they'll be shot out of the sky within seconds. And they said, nope, we got to go. And you can watch the sensor as they pull away, and then the Chinook flies by, goes out of view, and gets shot down on top of the hill.
So Razor 01, he's coming in with a wingman, sends his wingman, and that's Chuck, right? So
this is a guy named Randy.
So
yeah,
Randy,
so Chuck is in 1, and 2 is Randy.
So somebody's on their way to the crash site, right? Razor 04 was your original aircraft, right? Razor 01 was the one you actually crashed, right? Or I mean the one that picked you up. Razor 4 picked you up.
Yeah.
That's back
it's
in Gardez.
Confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, I want the listener to be able to get this. So one aircraft's crashed at the bottom of the mountain. That's Razor 01. That was
3.
Three.
Razor 3.
4 picked you up. Razor 01's coming in from Bagram, sends his wingman off back to Gardez, where you are currently, unbeknownst to them. He heads over towards the crash site, and then finds out you are, in fact, you've been picked up by Razor 04.
Right.
He comes back to Gardez, and that's when they say, let's get back to the top of the mountain. And who is it that heads to the top of the mountain?
So that's Razor 1 is Chuck. Right?
And why?
He's got
and
the Rangers on board.
And is it normal for Chuck, who had come in with another aircraft, is it normal for Chuck to say, I'm going solo, or was it normal for them to send a wingman with them, or?
No, we do. It's something we do quite often, especially in Casevacs.
Okay.
So, we always together, in a flight of 2 or more.
Yeah.
But if you're coming in to a hot LZ, you don't want to all come in, right? So oftentimes, like I would always use Chuck 2 as my Casevac bird, and would have the medics on board, or the surgical resuscitation team, and I would lead them in. They would drop off, and I would lead them in so I knew where they were.
Sure.
Right. And then I would kind of fly around and maybe make myself like a target, kind of troll for the bad guys to try to shoot me, and leave him alone, because if you're going in for a CASEVAC that we normally win on, there's usually machine guns, RPGs, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so you want the fire to come at the aircraft that's moving and not the one that's sitting on the ground. And so that was kind of a normal thing. Yeah.
Sure. And so the AC-130 says we have to leave, and that's probably another story for another
That is,
time. But
yeah.
they leave. Razor 01 now arrives at the top of the mountain and take us from there.
Okay. So as he's on short final, this is all on Predator and ISR footage. He takes a couple of RPG rounds to his number 2 engine, so the engine on the right side. The aircraft, remember I said, if I lost the engine taken off, I had to dive down the hill because there's no way I could fly.
Yeah.
Well, if he had made it another 50 feet, he could have done the exact same thing I did, and he would have even had momentum. But instead, he's in this decelerative attitude. He gets hit, and they land on the upsloping portion of the hill, and I had been just on the other side. So they slam into the snow, and then they just get opened up on from both sides with heavy machine gun fire. You still got the Dishka, and you got one of the crew chiefs got shot in the quad, with that Dishka, splayed it right open. I mean, luckily he had a big, like his grandfather's military knife, hanging from his belt, and the round actually hit that, and that slowed it down enough that he still has his leg today. He's
No way.
Yeah, he's got a scar like this big, but and there's a whole story that goes with him being stuck in a Skedco, the plastic stretchers, that roll up. It's just like a sled.
Yeah.
So they hit the ground, and the Rangers immediately try to get off, and the bullets are just coming through the sheet metal. The interesting thing with a Chinook is that the fuel tanks are big, they're ballistically tolerant, and if they have fuel in them, bullets don't go through them, and they don't just blow up because they get shot, right? And there's a whole process with that. But so anybody that was above the fuel tanks, as in standing up and running out the back, died before they ever got out of the aircraft. And I can't, I wish I could remember. I don't remember how many Rangers that is.
Yeah, because the rounds don't come through the tanks.
Right. So anybody who's on the floor,
Yeah,
isn't getting hit. Right. And the tanks are maybe 2.5, 3 feet tall from the floor. They're bigger outside, but if you're walking on the floor, what the protection they offer you is about 2 to 3 feet. So if you're laying on the floor, you're in pretty good shape. And that's all of the wounded, like the pilot, pilot in command, Chuck. He got shot in the inner thigh, and he jettisoned his door and fell out the left side. The other pilot, Greg, pulled up his M4 and tried to defend himself, except when he went to grab the forestock of his M4, his hand was down because he'd been shot 3 AK-47 rounds in the hand, and it blew out the back of his hand, so he had no muscle control of his hand. So now he like in the movies, he squeezes off a couple of rounds. He gets hit, I think 4 times right where my logo is here in his body armor. We did a Stone Phillips interview a couple of years later, and he had that.
For those listening, that's in the heart.
Yeah. All tight shot group too. That guy knew what he was doing, or he was just lucky. But because think about it, he had 3 rounds in the palm of his hand, and then that same size in his chest, which the body armor absorbed. And then so he jumps into the back. The jump seat is still up, and he leaps over that into the hands of the medic. So our senior 160th medic is on the floor treating the door gunner who had been shot on the infill, and he unfortunately, Phil Svitak, was shot below the armor. Like the plate just doesn't go far enough down, and he was shot like in the belly button area, just below it. And so he's treating him, but he died on the floor. And so now Greg is in a guy named Corey in his lap, and Greg is trying to put it. We had these stupid little pouch right here, had a tourniquet in it, right? It's like a Vietnam era tourniquet. It was a little canvas thing. Absolutely didn't work, right? And you got to remember, everybody always thought if you put a tourniquet on, you're going to lose a limb, right? That's what they always taught you back then. So he's like, trying to pull it with his teeth. And Corey just pulls out a good old fashioned cravat and a dowel, and he
Just
wraps
twist.
it around him and just starts cranking. And he likes to tell the stories. Every time I cranked it, Greg screeched. Like, yeah, I bet. But he had that tourniquet on for 15 hours up there, and he now flies. He flew corporate, I think, or for an airline, and now he flies EMS. So he has at Walter Reed. They fixed his hand,
Wow, no way.
but he lived. And that incident up there is what changed the whole thought on tourniquets. Like, now they go, you get shot,
Oh,
just
yeah.
put a tourniquet on. That was because of Roberts Ridge. The guys, the medics all went down to San Antonio. They had a big conference of emergency surgeons and all this other stuff. But so that's what happened there. So
Yeah.
there's all this chaos going on. The Rangers and the crew chiefs from the back,
Yeah.
are trying to return fire, but there's nowhere to hide. The enemy is under some pretty good cover, and the pilots are both injured. So the senior guys, other than the Ranger platoon leader, who was okay, a guy named Nate Self, he's a great guy. Then they went around. The Rangers went around and grabbed Chuck, by the drag strap of his
Yeah.
body armor, and just dragged him, and his femur had been, split open by that gun. And so he's got a compound fracture. He's screaming as they pull him, but they don't have much choice. And they get them all on the other side. So they've got the casualties all lined up, right? They've got the KIAs, but they have a lot of wounded people. And they put the crew chief that had the bullet in his quad, the 14.5. They put him in a Skedco, right? So there's this plastic thing, and it's on the snow. And during one of the fights, he starts to slide, right? Like
They
just
put
like
him
a
in. They
kid.
put him in a giant kid sled. On
Yes,
a giant mountain.
except
On
he's
a yeah.
tied into it, right?
Yeah.
He's tied into it with the 550 cord, and it's headed for the edge. And he said he saw the edge coming, and
Yeah.
that edge is 12,500 feet, down to about
Of
9,000 feet.
yeah.
So he's
About
got to
straight
several.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he would not have survived that. And one of the crew chiefs, a guy named Jed, dove on him under fire. So everything they did in the beginning was under very direct fire. So he
Tense. Yeah.
dives on him and holds him, and Dave, the guy that got shot, is like, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." He goes, "Yeah, whatever, come on." So
So
that's what's going on.
what? And I don't want to diminish like what's going on the mountain, because it's a fantastic story for anybody who's listening. If you haven't heard the story, and there's interviews with Britt, um and there's documentaries on Chappie and what happens, those guys. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with you back at Gardez and some of the other guys. Are you guys trying to get another aircraft, or are you aware of what's going on? Are you aware that they've crashed?
Yeah. So I'm in the. We had an other government agency there that
Yeah.
was running the thing. You had a SEAL Master Chief who was under alias, so I don't know his real name, is in charge of the forward operating base as a weatherman and a couple of spooks, right?
Yeah.
So
This is a
uh,
skeleton crew here.
yeah, because all the shooters left
Yeah.
on British Chinooks, and they're prepping to do a rescue, right?
Yeah.
So there's nobody there shooting. And this is its own story, right? Is that electronic intercepts are that the Taliban know that all that's left is a skeleton crew, and they start heading our way in force to take the fob.
Wow.
So this guy, we'll call him Hal, walks me around. It's like something out of a movie. So we've got all of my M60, the M60 from Razor 4. We have like 4 AT4s, anti-tank weapons. We've got grenades. We have a lot of bullets. We all have M4s, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And we come up with a defense plan for what looked like the Alamo, and we had a plan where an E4 from the 10th Mountain Division, who was an engineer, and he rigged the back wall of the fob to blow out, because we figured the two big gates up front is where the focus of the attack would be.
Yeah.
And when we couldn't hold on anymore, which we didn't think we could based on the force that was coming, we'd blow out the wall, drive through the wall, and haul ass and try to get away. And my job was to crawl into the ammo pit, which was this hole in the ground full of ammo, and it was a satchel charge with like a ring. It's like something out of the movie. And I was supposed to go in there, pull the ring, run back, get in the thing, and off we go. And the AC-130 did come back, fired up the convoy, and they turned back. So we never did have to defend the base. But
So there actually was so the intercept was correct. There was a whole wave of Taliban on its way to overrun the base, but for the grace of God, the 130 shows back up and lays waste to those guys that are on their way to you. Wow.
This time he does what he's supposed to do and makes me happy.
Yeah.
And then, so then what we did is we hooked up, we took we had these rucksacks, Alice packs, right? And we were emptying those all out, putting ammunition in there and water and some MREs. And we tried to label the ammo rucks as ammo, with big red tape and stuff. So that the idea was if Razor 2 could just fly over and kick them out, right? They're called kick rucks.
Yeah.
At least they'd have, water and ammo, but I didn't want them going after the wrong bag. Like, oh, look, I got, tuna MRE, instead of the bullets are over there.
Bullets. Yeah, I need bullets, not tuna.
Yeah. So we did that, and they did load those on, but they didn't end up using them.
Okay.
And Razor 2 got called out before we got the rucks on his aircraft. And what he did is he took the remaining Ranger force and he infilled them to the original HLZ at the base of the hill, and they walked up. Yeah. So once they got to the top and reinforced, then they were able to take the hill, and that's, like I said, its own story. But so now I'm down at the at Gardez at the FOB, and I can watch the feeds for all of what's going on. And the feeds back then, there was like 3 of them. There was like 2 Preds and a platform of some sort.
Yeah.
And I'm on the phone talking back to Bagram, to our commander, and he says, okay, at 2000, 8 o'clock, be outside. We got an aircraft coming to get you. They're going to do the rescue at like 7:40, and then everything was in Zulu back then, so I don't know what time that was. And so okay, so I get off the phone, and the weatherman comes in, the Air Force weather forecaster. He comes in and he says, a reporter was driving through a checkpoint and they threw a grenade in her car. She's all messed up. She's going to die. So now, as we're moving to the LZ to get picked up, I got to bring my medic over to this woman who's a reporter. I just looked her up recently. I can't remember her name. My wife actually looked her up for me, and she's doing well. But so we had to stabilize her before we could leave. And I'm like, how's she looking? He's like, I don't know. And the medic's working on her, and I can hear.
This is right outside the gate of Gardez?
Yeah, right outside the gate of Gardez there. So my crew is yelling at me, sir, we got to go. We got to go. And I'm like, we can't go, right? And so I said, all right, you got 5 minutes. If you can't stabilize her in 5 minutes, I'm staying with you, and we're going to just stay here, and everybody else leaves. And he's like, all right, I think we'll be all right. So he gets her done. We jump in the back of a pickup truck. We drive through this minefield to get to the LZ, and in come 2 helicopters. And the one I'm supposed to get on is the one to the left. So I go over there, and what I didn't know was that was full of the KIAs. So all of the deceased U.S. service member were in there, and they were. So there's no nice way to say it. They were frozen.
Sure. Let me go back for 1 second, because they've now gone to Takur Ghar.
Yeah.
And recovered everybody, right? And I don't think they got Neil's body, right? They didn't get Neil's body for.
Yep, they did.
They did. Okay, so they got Neil's body. Britt, the Rangers, who came in on that second wave, everybody's off the mountain. They come back to Gardez and get you. I don't think I was aware of this part of the story. So now they're coming on, 2 birds on, a lot of injured, a lot of dead, a lot of exhausted people fighting and everything else.
Right. So all of the live people or wounded went, on it. They just left, right?
Yeah.
They had wasted no time. So the only aircraft that doesn't really matter time-wise is all the dead guys.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because they were frozen up there, the bodies are contorted in some very difficult ways to put them in neatly.
Yeah.
On the floor. They're laid as neatly as they could put them. But when my crew gets on board, we've got our miniguns and our ComSec gear, all this stuff. And the first crew chief that gets on falls over one of the dead bodies, face to face, and it's his best friend. right? So he freaks out. He stands up and he hooks his vest into the seat rail, and he's not moving, right? He's
Oh,
only halfway up the cabin. So now we can't get everybody on board. I'm like, get on, get on, get on. And the pilots are yelling at us because they're going to run out of gas. And I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, whatever, you know. So we get on board and I sit down and they take off. And who am I sitting next to but Neil Roberts? And, I'm not on comms. It's very loud underneath the engine. It's dark
Neil's
and
dead.
he's dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was kind of freaky about it was that his watch, the luminescent dots on his watch
Yeah.
were just sort of moving like this with the vibration of the aircraft. So we're thigh to thigh, right? I'm sitting right,
Yeah.
our legs are intertwined essentially. And I'm looking at him and I can't tell if he's alive or dead. I think he's moving, you know? And then I realized, no, he can't. I mean, once you see the details, which I'm not going to go into, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it was just freaky that, his watch was moving, so you would hear these stories, the Taliban took all this stuff. They didn't touch anything, they didn't have time,
Wow.
they did a coup de grace on him and that was that.
Yeah, and I'd be reluctant for anybody listening who didn't say who doesn't get the you have to listen to the story about what Chappie and everybody, but what Neil went through, what he fought through by himself for that amount of time from the time he fell off, and how he took that M249 and engaged the enemy for as long as he could in waist deep snow and fought
Yep.
as a one man show. And then what all the other guys did, the guys who landed low and had to fight their way up the mountain, what Britt and those guys did who landed on the top of the mountain, getting their asses handed to them and fighting true heroes in every sense of the word. So we don't mean to trivialize that by any
Nope.
means. I can't help but laugh, and I hope if I were ever to something to happen to me like that, and somebody were to fall face to face and be laying there with, me gone from this earth, I hope years from there they would laugh about that as well, because, if we're not laughing, then we're crying as veterans. But
Yeah.
it's sort of a fascinating to me that with the little things that you remember from what must have been just surreal. Like just a
It was
surreal, right?
there was two other surreal moments that night. One was, so they weren't kidding that they were going to run out of gas, and they got
Yeah.
permission to land at a forward arming and refueling point for the 101st, right?
Wait, I'm sorry, for clarification, because there's a lot of aircraft that are running out of gas in this story. So the one burns in, has literally no fuel left, right? When you
Right.
say they're going to run out, you're talking about now this is the aircraft that you're on to get out of Gardez to get somewhere safer. And now
All
this
of the
one's low on it
KIAs,
with all of the KIAs, and now this one's close to running out of gas.
right?
Oh,
Except I
wow.
don't know that. I mean,
You
they
can't win. You
told me it
can't win for
was.
losing.
So we come into the FARP and it's just a Chinook with an internal gas tank with a hose running out of it, right? And it's very, very dusty, and they have to do a go round, right? So they're coming in and they don't like the parameters, they can't see, and they take off again, they go around. They do that 3 times, and then they come back. I can tell there's a different pilot on the controls just by the way it's moving, and the aircraft slams down on the ground, and I can feel it roll, right? It's on wheels,
Yeah.
and then I feel the brakes jam. It's like like catching a 3-wire on an aircraft carrier. And they plug the fuel in, and just as they plug the fuel in, the number 1 engine, which is the one on the left,
Yeah.
quits, and the auxiliary power unit, which is the small turbine engine that they use when the main engines are not on, also quits because it's fed from the same tank. So that tank was 0. And then the other one was still running, and they started getting gas, and the gas went into that tank first. And then I'm sitting here thinking, oh, great, we're stuck in the middle of nowhere with no gas, with
Yeah.
all the guys, and out of the frying pan into the fire. And it's like I was at least in the fob,
Yeah.
you know, and now I'm out in the middle of the desert. So anyway, all of a sudden you hear the APU start again, the auxiliary power unit. So there's enough gas in the other tank now. They get cranked up and they go. So now 45-minute ride to Bagram, except Bagram, since the very, very early days, I was there in November of 2001,
Yeah.
had no lights. Right? It's pitch dark. We used to joke it's Bagram dark, like being up a well digger's,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know what, right? And so we land, and some trucks pull up to carry off the stretchers, and we get off, me and my crew, and they're like, "Sir, where are we?" I'm like, "I haven't got a clue. I've never seen this place before. I think maybe we're in Kabul, you
No
know."
way.
And we couldn't because all the lights were on, all the
Yeah.
landscaping lights and stuff that we didn't know even worked. And then someone goes, "No, no, you're at Bagram." It's like, "But where?" And they go, "That's the control tower." I'm like, "Wow, okay." So we gather our stuff together and we walk down what's called Disney Highway, which is this dirt. Now it's
Yeah.
a freaking highway, but back then it was mud. And we walked down there to our compound, walked into the command tent. I was like, "Ah, here I am."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey guys, it's been a hell of a day.
Yeah, and it's
In
very
I,
surreal. Just
I don't know how else to capture that. What a surreal day. You were in the one, two, what, three air, well, one aircraft that in a single day, one aircraft that crashed, two aircraft that ran out of fuel, right? That came down
yeah,
hard as they
on
were
the
running
road,
out of fuel. Yeah. One that broke before the mission even started, right?
right?
What a, do
So
you,
then,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, the worst part is the next night, um, there's a blizzard coming in, a snowstorm, and so they've got to go back and the entire anvil, if you will, all this,
Yeah.
the coalition special forces, the Germans, the
Yeah.
Canadians, they all had to come out because it was expected that they'd perish up there because there was no way to get them,
Yeah.
resupply them or anything. So they had to come out the next night, except we were down to like two flyable aircraft. We had our 3rd Battalion down in Kandahar just come into country and just built their Chinooks up. They flew back up to Bagram to help us take them out. But that morning there was an earthquake, which was interesting, and a vehicle interdiction. They thought they had Bin Laden, of all things. Maybe he had been in the
Yeah.
valley, and now here goes this, 6-foot Arab-looking guy in a white robe, kind of thing. And they launched all the flyable aircraft with the other crews. They did it, and when they came back, it wasn't him, obviously, but when they came back, they decided that they had to go get these coalition special forces, and the only two crews that hadn't flown were me and Razor Zero Two. So Razor 3 and 2 hadn't flown for whatever reason. I think it was because two's aircraft was broken. It was the one that I had flown earlier and it broke.
Yeah.
Now it's fixed, and the commander comes in and goes, "Al, I need you to do something." He goes, "I need you to go back out in the mountains and get the special forces guys." He's like,
This is the next night.
"This is the next night." I'm like,
Yeah.
okay." So I look around the tent, and everybody is kind of averting their eyes, like, "Don't pick me, don't pick me,"
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Al, I had a long day, man.
I know who I'm gonna go. So I got my buddy Randy, and I was like, "Hey," we call him Ahmed, and he's like, "Ahmed, we gotta go fly, buddy." And he's like, "Let's do it." He's very boisterous. I was like, "All right." So we went back out. Now, just before we leave the tent, the intel guy comes in and says, "Oh, by the way, the Germans, which are the last people to come out, say they're surrounded by men with RPGs. Surrounded being a relative term is like 4 or 5 people,
Yeah.
but they got RPGs, and they're the last group to come out." And I said to the AC-130 liaison, I said, "Tell the Germans to turn on their strobe lights and then kill everything within 200 meters outside their
That's right.
perimeter. It's
That's
not
right.
that hard." And
Yeah.
the guy goes, "I can't do that." And he goes, "We don't know if they're enemy." I said, "The Germans told you they're enemy
Yeah.
and that they are armed." He goes, "But we don't know they're enemy. They haven't been shot at yet. There's no hostile act." And so I got it. It was a full bird colonel. I got in his face. And the commander, my commander, is a captain at the time, comes up and he grabs me by the collar and just kind of yanks me. Right? He's an old Delta Force guy when he was enlisted.
Nice.
He yanks me away from him. He's like, "Al, you know, don't worry about it. They're not going to shoot anybody, but you'll be all right." I'm like, "Yeah, you told me that yesterday, right?"
Yeah. 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 You're talking to the guy who just got shot down
Yeah.
yesterday by an RPG.
Here's the same circumstances, and I have a new opportunity to kill the bad guys. And you're gonna tell me no, I can't. So they kind of coaxed me into it. If they'll be there if you need them. Yeah, right. So anyway, we're on our way in. Right, it's the last pickup,
Yeah.
and the
You're
AC-130
flying.
says the
You and Randy are
AC-130.
flying.
What's that?
You and Randy are flying.
Yeah, me and Randy are
Okay.
flying,
Okay.
and the AC-130 calls us, says, "Hey, we got to break station. It's going to be daylight in Masira in 2 hours." I'm like, did you hear yourself? I'm 3 minutes out, and you're going to leave me? And the guy's like, yeah, we got to go. It's going to, we got to get out of country while it's still dark, blah, blah, blah. And, you've dealt with the Air Force, for all the good things they do, they can be a challenge sometimes to work with as partners. And in this case, we tried to shame them and they would not be shamed. And then Randy shamed him. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he's like, you can't wait 3 more minutes. Really? 3 minutes? You can go 10 knots faster going home and it'll still be dark, So they waited. And as soon as we got the Germans on board, they left, and it's like, but all I could think of is, why would you do this? 2 days before this, same circumstances, the aircraft left. I mean, I understand why they did. They were being instructed to, but, did you learn nothing from that? But like I said, they also hadn't had the chance to digest that,
Sure.
and do their thing. But we get back, and our unit rotated back to the States. Our new unit ripped in, and I didn't. That's March. I didn't come back till August.
So, oh, you stayed over in country? No, or you came out.
So I went home. Yeah.
You went
So I
home.
went home, like March 10th,
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
I came back like August 1st or something.
Holy cow! Oh, that's a
Yeah.
quick return.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And
in those early days, you only had so many flight leads.
yeah.
And we would typically do 140-day, 150-day rotations,
Okay.
knowing you could be extended a little bit or whatever. But and then it just kept getting shortened up through the years: 90-day rotations, 60-day rotations, 30, and then 30 was too short, so you go back to 90 and then 120. It just fluctuated with personnel
Yeah.
and what was going on, especially when Iraq kicked off, because now there's like two forces and half as
Hey,
many flight leads really to deal with.
In the few minutes that we have left, what first of all, thanks for sharing that story. That's amazing, and I know we glossed over so many things, and there's so many details. And for anybody who wants to get into the details, there's a number of books that have been
Yeah.
written on it, and there's some great documentaries, and there's so much heroism, and I don't use that word lightly, from guys like yourself, the pilots, the air crew. Um, what's the name of the aircrew guy that was pulling the other one back in? Is it Madden who was pulling the
Dan
other guy?
Madden, yeah.
Yeah, just to you were telling that story, and in my head I'm thinking he's on an aircraft that is like been severely damaged, and he's pulling in a guy who's flailing, who's about 150, I don't know, 250-pound guy, and he's pulling him back up, and it's just the visual I have of that, and you think about heroes and what you did uh, um, to right the aircraft, and then to go back out again and again and again, and for Britt and all the guys to get off and go back in, knowing full well that what they're going in against. It's the kind of story that should give everybody goosebumps, and hopefully we've had an opportunity to, here just to keep. Uh, to keep to keep Neil. I know his teammates called him Fifi in the teams, but to keep
Yeah, there's
Mark's,
curly hair.
it is right. He's got that
Yeah.
orange curly hair and that porn star mustache. I love it. But to keep Neil's memory and to keep his legacy alive, and do the same thing for Tom, or for Chapman, and for the Rangers who went in to get those guys, and the air crew. So, man, thanks so much for sharing that story with us. I guess I guess it'd probably be worthwhile just I want to give the floor back to you if there's you got anything you want to share.
Well, I'll tell you you think of the confusion you had there
Yeah.
with Razor One, Razor Two, all of that was real time. That now
Yeah.
just imagine you're in the thick of the fight, right? So I was telling you, I helped with a documentary that hasn't been put out yet, and I had to write down razors for dummies. Of like, there was a point where like Razor One and Two were headed back to Bagram from the initial infills, and I'm passing them, and we're like waving at each other, as we go by, and so that was something right there. And then, of course, we learned a lot from that, and equipment improved, and communications, and all that kind of stuff. So, the rest of the years there until the unfortunate downfall there, things were going really well as far as the operators go.
Yeah.
But I'm
And-
really
and-
proud to do. I retired a couple of years ago. I was able to go up to the flight detachment at West Point to finish out my career, and I was lucky enough to meet the county executive at an air show. I helped kind of make it happen, this big air show, the Thunderbirds and such. And he offered me a job. He's like, I don't have a helicopter, but I think you got the skills to do it. And so I ended up in public safety. I'm the emergency manager for the county, Orange County, and New York. And I really enjoy it. It's a lot like being in JSOC, the joint environment. You got fire, EMS, police and stuff. So it's fun. And I did write a book, which hasn't come out yet. It comes out in the summer.
Oh, fantastic. What's the name of the book?
So it's called Razor 03, A Night Stalker's Wars. And really, it's about some of the stuff we just talked about in another couple of years. The lone survivor. I planned his rescue and chased Bo Bergdahl, and we did some Tora Bora stuff. And there's things like that. And the reason I call it Night Stalker's Wars is there's the GWAT is one war, and then my wife, unfortunately, based on the shoot down from Anaconda, never really recovered emotionally from that, and she turned to prescription pain meds and ended up dying, which is why I moved out of special ops up to here, so.
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
No, thanks. I mean, it is one of those things that, I almost hate to tell it, that part of the story, because,
Oh, but it's yeah.
but it's one of those things that it's important in the story. And it comes out, it's supposed to come out in July, but I think the supply chain issues are going to force it to September, so we'll see how
And
that.
we can find it on Amazon.
You'll be able to. The marketing people haven't put that out yet. So if anybody's interested, they can look on my website, which is just finished. It's alancmack.com. And
ALANCMACK.com.
correct. Yep.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
we'll make sure we put that up. And then and the name of the book one more time.
Razor 03, A Night Stalker's Wars.
All right, fantastic. Well, Alan, how many total years? 36 years?
Yeah, it's 35 years, 11 months.
Okay. Well,
So
who's counting?
I'm always afraid a fact checker's going to go, you were not in the military for 36 years.
Yeah,
But 35 just doesn't do it justice.
Yeah, we're not part of the outrage culture on the internet that's going to hold you for shaving off one month shy of 36 years. But brother, thank you so much for a life of service and I got to say for continuing to serve, going in and as the director of public safety up in Orange County, man, you're continuing to serve. It's a cool example for the rest of us. Thanks for this fantastic story. And we're looking forward to reading the book, man. Appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. It was fun.
It's great.